leaders around the world are condemning this attack on America and taking steps to ensure they're not next. NBC's Keith Miller is at the U.S. Embassy in London this morning. Keith, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt. Well, indeed, we're here at the embassy where there's extraordinary security. There are uniformed police encircling the entire building. And overnight, a first flower was laid under this maple tree across the street, and it has grown and grown throughout the day. Every 5 minutes, people are showing up to lay a flower. There's pictures of the Twin Towers and a framed photograph. The grief, the anger, the frustration, and the sorrow that is being felt in America is being felt worldwide.
In Europe, it seemed as if it was war. Possible American targets in London, Paris, and Berlin sealed off. Airports, military installations, and government offices put on the highest state of alert. A half-dozen governments held emergency cabinet meetings. The world was watching and responding.
Terrorists bring war.
The picture showed American symbols of power, wealth, and influence crumbling.
Later,
World leaders responded swiftly.
This mass terrorism is the new evil in our world today. It is perpetrated by fanatics who are utterly indifferent to the sanctity of human life.
In Germany, Chancellor Gerhard Schröder called the attack an act of war against the civilized world. At the UN, Secretary General Kofi Annan.
We are all traumatized by this terrible tragedy.
This morning in the Vatican, Pope John Paul II opened his weekly audience with an unprecedented condemnation of the attack.
Yesterday was indeed a dark day in our history and caused unspeakable sorrow in the hearts of all men and women.
A no-fly zone in force over the city of London. Major commercial centers put on increased security. In Russia, all military aircraft are on combat alert. Russian President Vladimir Putin, addressing the American people, said, "We are with you." Americans overseas joined others in feeling the pain inflicted thousands of miles away.
Sickening. I'm just so upset. I can't think of what to say. It's awful.
Someone has declared war on you, for God's sake.
Tributes are being held in honor of the victims. Candlelight vigils held overnight in Germany. Flowers laid at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, Oslo, and a dozen other cities. The world has responded to the nightmare in America. Many people aware that if it can happen in America, it can happen anywhere.
It may be too soon for Americans to accept the comfort of strangers, but I can assure you here, many of the people coming here are not Americans. They're British, other nationalities, laying flowers, spending a moment to, of course, sympathize with the victims, and also, I think, to show their solidarity with America during this very difficult and very troubled time. Matt?
Keith, before I let you go, there were reports that aviation officials halted civilian flights over Great Britain yesterday. What's the status of that?
That still stays in effect, Mac. There is, in fact, a no-fly zone over the entire city of London. We're used to the sounds of airplanes, of course, coming through this city because they follow the River Thames down to Heathrow Airport, their main international airport. No flights today anywhere over the city of London.
All right, Keith Miller in London this morning. Keith, thank you very much. And now here's Katie.
All right, thank you very much, Matt. We're going to go once again to downtown Manhattan, where our own Ann Curry is standing by to update us on the situation there. Ann?
Katie, I've just run from an area that was about 3 buildings away from the collapsed World Trade Center buildings. And I can tell you that just a few moments ago, we saw that what was left of building number 7 still had was still smoldering. We were told by firefighters that there were still fires that they were putting out. We looked a short time ago and we were told that the fire may almost be out. But of course, this is a situation that is ever changing depending on the wind and the circumstances. They've got their hands so full. We also can report to you that just a short time ago, dogs were taken in by the New York City Police Department. These are human-finding dogs. So that is another symbol of hope here, where there needs to be more hope, as we have hundreds of rescuers and volunteers on scene trying desperately to get through this rubble to see if there's anyone still left alive, Katie.
All right. Ann Curry in downtown Manhattan. Ann, thanks very much. We'll be checking in with you throughout the morning. Appreciate it. 8:42. Once again, here's Matt.
All right, Katie, thank you very much. Sandy Berger served as National Security Advisor in the Clinton administration. Mr. Berger, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
What's being done right now? You've been in the Situation Room when crisis situations have occurred in the past. What's happening at the White House right now?
First of all, everything that can possibly be done to help the emergency effort, the rescue effort from the federal level. Second of all, trying to sift out fact from misfact and determine precisely who was responsible. And third, developing a long-term strategy for responding firmly and forcefully.
You talk about sifting out what is fact and not fact. How much proof, what level of proof would you require, would you recommend that the president get before taking some kind of military action?
I think we'll know who's responsible for this in the short term. There are enough pieces here, literally and figuratively, that we will be able to put this together. After the African embassy bombings, it became quite clear in a matter of days, if not weeks, that bin Laden was responsible. We responded with an attack on his camps, on his facilities, and on his command and control. I think this will emerge rather quickly from the physical evidence here, as well as the intelligence.
So it appears, and if you listen to what President Bush had to say last night, it appears there is a policy shift here, away from what the reaction was to the embassy bombings, where, as you just said, we struck at Osama bin Laden's camps and facilities. And if you listen to what the president said last night, we will not distinguish between the terrorists who committed the acts and those who harbored them. What should we take away from that?
Well, I think that's perfectly correct. I don't think that's a distinction we've made in the past. Bin Laden is a difficult target. We have to not only know where he is, we have to know where he's going to be. That requires a level of knowledge and penetration which is not easy. Afghanistan is a difficult and remote place. It's 1,000 miles from the nearest body of water. It's surrounded by Iran and Afghanistan, Russia, Tajikistan. These are not exactly easy staging grounds. So this is not an easy set of options. But I think things have been escalated yesterday to a new level, and we're in a new phase, and we may have to consider a different kind of risk than we have in the past.
You know, I don't want you to jump to any conclusions. We certainly don't know if this was
Correct.
Osama bin Laden. But if indeed it proves that this was the case and the Taliban has been harboring this man for several years, what type of action, military action, would we take against Afghanistan?
Well, let me say, first of all, there's no economic pressure here that has not already been placed on the Taliban. One has to understand that Afghanistan is a miserable, broken down, desperate place with 1 million starving people. It's not a target-rich environment. There are no World Trade Centers in Kabul. So it's not simply a situation in which you can strike out at Afghanistan and do the kind of horrible damage that we did here yesterday. We may have to look at a range of military options that go beyond simply cruise missiles from a very far distance. They are not rifles in a situation like this. And the escalation that took place yesterday, both in terms of capability and in terms of malevolent intent, suggests that we're in for a long-term effort and have to be prepared for the consequences of our actions, which will have their own effects.
What you mean there is that once we attack, we will be the target of attack out of retaliation.
That's a possibility, plus the fact that we're operating in a region of the world where bin Laden is popular, where it is not easy to simply mount an operation of any kind. But again, I think the risk calculation here has shifted yesterday.
What kind of diplomatic effort is it going to take, Mr. Berger? Back during the Gulf War in the early 1990s, an alliance was put together against a very definable enemy. What type of alliance or coalition is going to have to be put together for us to be able to take military action in that part of the world?
Well, first of all, it's not simply in Afghanistan. Let's assume here, for this purposes, this path leads to bin Laden. We don't know that for sure. There has been cooperation with intelligence services over the last year. There have been a number of cells taken down in Germany and other places. That's going to have to intensify. There can be no tolerance of the existence of these people in any country. And there will have to be a recognition that this is not just an attack on the United States, it's really an attack on all of the civilized world.
Former National Security Advisor Sandy Berger. Mr. Berger, thanks very much.
Thank you, Matt.
Once again, here's Katie.
Matt, thank you. 24 hours ago, this city was attacked. While there was also death and destruction in Washington and Pennsylvania, New York is a place like no other. NBC's Jane Pauley reports.
The mighty World Trade Center tumbling down. Everyday New Yorkers had to run for their lives. How fragile the city seemed today. We deployed a team of Dateline staffers to bring us images of a city under siege on handheld digital cameras.
What I saw today on the streets of Manhattan really were the extremes of New York. It's the best and the worst of people.
I got 20 blocks away when the smell and the taste really hit me. Way in the distance, the huge cloud on the horizon, but I could taste and smell something that was like the worst electrical fire ever imaginable.
They brought us a startling glimpse of what it was like to be at ground zero of a major terrorist attack.
What's it like down there?
Save 6 people. I tried my best to try to save everybody.
First, get away, then get home. Businesses were closed and buildings evacuated. Thousands upon thousands were left to negotiate a maze of closed streets and suspended services.
There's a real sense of panic on the streets among the tens of thousands of pedestrians, and it was easy to see why. Look to the horizon on the south, and you see an enormous gray-black cloud from the explosion.
As they moved toward safety uptown, people tried to keep up with the flurry of events any way they could. Even the wounded walked. This woman was on the 19th floor of the World Trade Center when the first explosion hit. Hurt, but lucky to get out before the building collapsed. We found her 30 blocks north, heading to Bellevue Medical Center.
A huge cloud of gray, huge cloud of gray came and everyone started running and stampeding and everyone was falling on the ground. And I don't know what knocked me over. I don't know if it was the person or just the force of the wind. But I fell down, I just covered my head. I prayed that a building would fall on me and I really thought I was going to die.
Doctors and medical students lined up like extras on the set of a disaster movie. Almost immediately after the attack, along with all 3 major airports, the city's subways, bridges, tunnels, and major highways were all closed. The FDR Drive, normally a winding snarl of congested traffic, empty. Thousands of commuters from New York's outer boroughs were left stranded in Manhattan. By mid-afternoon, a police officer on the scene estimated that more than 20,000 people had crossed the 59th Street Bridge on foot. Meanwhile, Grand Central Station was jammed, but the trains were running until noon.
I remember standing in Grand Central and watching a man and a woman just scream and embrace each other and feel relief. I felt their relief to see each other again. After people had been managing to get out for about 15 minutes, all of a sudden they announced that they were evacuating the building, and people were ordered to get out immediately, and workers in their orange vests were running for the exit, and we didn't know what was going on. We just ran with them.
Confused Confused passengers poured out of the building after a bomb threat.
It hit me that this building really could blow up, and I was scared. I was afraid that the building literally could blow up underneath my feet.
All around the city, it was a mass migration of hundreds of thousands of people, but uncannily quiet. Perhaps it was the unspeakable horrors many had seen.
It was orderly, but it was chaotic. People were shocked. Everyone was dazed. People didn't really want to look each other in the eye, I think, for fear of breaking down. The question on everybody's lips seemed to be, what is going on, and is there more of it that's going to come?
This was supposed to be Election Day in New York. As if anyone took note, it was officially called off. Everything was. What was open was tightly locked down.
What's that? Can't be doing no pictures.
Okay, it's NBC
News.
News.
Don't you understand?
It's NBC News.
I don't care who it is.
Security at all buildings that might be targets was extremely tight. Our own building, the famous tourist destination at Rockefeller Plaza, was evacuated, but for NBC's news operations to bring you this story. And all over Manhattan, there was this strange sort of gridlock.
The uptown avenues in Manhattan have been turned into virtual parking lots as everyone tries to flee northward. Meanwhile, the downtown avenues have all been sealed off, but for emergency vehicles.
Cell phone service came and went. Anxious people called their loved ones the old-fashioned way. Sometimes that didn't work either.
People were forced to use payphones, which is kind of a joke in Manhattan because it's hard to find a payphone that works.
The only thing that was easy today was getting lost in the scramble.
She doesn't have a cell phone. They don't work anyway. She is not mobile because she's got emphysema and she can't walk very fast.
David Douglas's 64-year-old mother lives in an apartment building just 4 blocks from the World Trade Center. Soon after the attack, she had chest pains. So he flagged a passing car and the driver headed for the nearest hospital.
But I said, look, lady, please, my mom can't walk. Please, please just take her north as much as you can because she can't breathe well.
He tried to follow on his rollerblades, but lost track of the car and spent the rest of the day searching hospitals.
So I just want to know, is there any system of finding people with...
Well, they're doing the best. We're doing the best we can. It's pretty chaotic.
He searched family reunion centers.
Lucille Lovato. A-B-A-T-O.
And even public schools desperate to find his mother.
Are there any people being kept here?
Finally, after 4 hours of futile searching, he called home. There was a message on his answering machine.
It's my mom.
She was safe, staying with a friend in his very own apartment building.
She's in my building.
For 2 New Yorkers, a small moment of comfort in a day when so many others will find none.
There are stories of hope and stories of horror. Derek Schwartz is a financial advisor for First Montauk Caroon Capital Management Company. He was on the 22nd floor of Tower Number 1 of the World Trade Center when the attack occurred. And Harry Crosby was on his way to work at Merrill Lynch at the World Financial Center just across the street. Good morning to both of you all.
Good morning.
Derek, let me start with you. You were on the 22nd floor of the first tower.
That's right.
That was attacked. When that plane plunged into the building, leaving that gaping, enormous gaping hole, what did it feel like to you?
I thought it was perhaps an earthquake because the plane, from what I understand, hit the highest part of the building. So I didn't really hear the explosion, just the shake. And it just was such a tremendous shake to be in a building of that scope and feel it move like it was a flower. It was just unbelievable. And you know, one of the colleagues in my office said, it's a bomb, and we tried to run out in the hall, and the whole hallway had collapsed that led to the stairwell.
The ceiling had fallen onto the hallway
and
floor.
The wall was blown out, and there were wires and water running through it, and he actually tried to run through the hall at first, and then he saw the hole in the wall and could look straight down the building and got scared and turned back. And, you know, we went in an office deciding what to do, to wait or to go and try and get through the hall. And the smoke started to pour in, and one guy started taping up the doors to keep the smoke from coming in. Finally, we said, one gentleman, Peter, I don't remember his last name, I wish I could thank him, because he was really the most courageous one who said, why don't we try and crawl through that rubble and get to the stairwell. Fortunately, we did,
Thank goodness you made that decision, but crawling through the rubble was a painstakingly long process, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean, in my mind, reflecting, it seemed pretty quick, but, you know, you just didn't know what was going to happen when we crawled through that hallway because the ceiling was totally collapsed. You didn't know something was going to collapse.
You didn't know if the floor was going to crumble beneath you.
Yeah, and there was wires and water, and it was just, but you just were so scared you just wanted to get out.
You finally got to the stairwell. What was the scene like there?
Actually seemed pretty, you know, calm.
Was there a steady stream of people coming down?
It was packed. It was like being on traffic on the highway. I mean, you're just step by step going, and people were yelling, move, go, hurry up, and people were yelling back, we can't. Finally, firemen started to come up as they were lugging their equipment up 80 floors, and they were saying, if the building's secure, don't worry, take your time, it's going to take a few hours.
And you saw the firefighters or some people who had been hurt when the plane crashed into the building being carried down the stairwell, is that right? Can you tell me about what you saw?
Well, basically, you know, every 5 or 10 minutes, firemen would be leading someone down who had been in the serious part of the building. And it was just horrible. I mean, these people, you could just see their skin was off, and it was just...
terribly burnt.
Yeah, they were walking. They were totally in shock. They were physically able to actually walk themselves down the stairs. Nobody was carried or on a stretcher. But these were people, obviously, who were just, you know, really near the explosion. Some people up by the cafeteria, I suppose, or something.
What floor is the cafeteria on?
I can't recall.
But sort of middle of the building?
I think so.
When you got towards the bottom of the stairwell, it was just... was it dark? It was filled with water?
Well, we had to leave through the mall at the very bottom of the building, and once you got to that point, the water was flowing down the staircases. It was flowing over our heads like rain from, I guess, the pipes being exploded, and then they were yelling at everyone just to move forward, get off your cell phones, and it wasn't until I finally got out to Church Street and I turned around and I saw that the other building had been hit while I was in the first one. I didn't even know the second tower had been hit because I looked at my watch around 9:30, and I think that's when the second one hit. I was still in the stairwell. I got out.
Because you didn't get out until, what, 10 o'clock?
I got out about 10 o'clock, roughly, I think. Maybe it was a little earlier. I walked across the street. People were on looking like it was a sightseeing tour, and I just decided I'm walking as far away from this as I can. And fortunately, I did, because apparently 10 or 20 minutes later, the second building collapsed. My building, I don't think, collapsed until a little after that.
When you saw that the second building had been hit, did you realize this wasn't an earthquake? Did you have any conception of what had happened?
Well, you understand, I was on the cell phone a couple times when it first happened, talking to family, my wife and my brother, and they had told me, my brother, a plane hit it. And I thought, okay, maybe it wasn't a terrorist attack. But when I got out and saw both towers on fire, I knew something was up. And then I walked down the street towards Pace University to try and call my wife. And that's when the building collapsed. And then I knew, I thought it was the end of the world. I didn't know what people were yelling about because I couldn't see it collapsing. But, you know, at that point, it was just the horror of the screams and the smoke and everything coming at you.
All your colleagues got out safely, as far as you know?
No, I did get out with both the two gentlemen that worked in my office that were in that morning, so I know that they got out safely.
I know both of you, and Harry, I'm going to let you tell your story in a moment, but you both are in the investment banking financial world. And you think about the people in those office buildings. We were talking about Morgan Stanley has something like 3,500 employees who work at the World Trade Center. What other kind of workers are there? I mean, just every kind of office? Insurance companies?
Insurance. I mean, obviously, you know, most of the major firms have some form of presence there.
There are retail brokerage offices, there are insurance companies, there are trading operations. I think there are currency trading operations, commodity trading operations there for a number of different firms. So a lot of executives, a lot of professionals there.
Harry, as Derek was making his way out of the building, you were outside the building on your way to work.
I was actually I was walking down the West Side Highway. I was actually driving down. I was in a car that was stopped at Houston, and I actually continued to proceed down. The first explosion, the first impact had already hit, and it didn't dawn on me at the time what was occurring.
Well, I don't think it dawned on anybody, really.
No, it was, I knew it was something completely traumatic and intense, but continued my walk down. My building, Merrill Lynch, is on the other side of the street, so I wanted to continue down to work. When the second impact occurred, I was about 10 blocks away. I felt that clearly there was some kind of a terrorist act or something, but I wanted to get to our work and get to our group and frankly, I was concerned about a lot of the individuals there. As I got close to our building, I saw an incredible amount of people streaming out the other way, and clearly I knew that it was...
Out of both towers?
Out of both towers, but also from across the street. Saw a lot of familiar faces from work.
Were people panicked, or were they pretty...
They were relatively calm. I think some of them were informed. They had seen the news based on, I think, the first impact. And by the time I'd gotten there, a lot of people were informed. The one thing that I found curious, and I was in the same position, no one really questioned the integrity or the strength of the buildings. A lot of the people, the police did a terrific job of moving people aside to get EMS and paramedics in, but no one really questioned that the buildings would fall at all. And I think a lot of people were caught, people that were milling around.
And, for example, all those firefighters who were inside trying to rescue people might have been caught when the building collapsed, of course, because many of them were unaccounted for in emergency personnel. Harry, I know you saw something that I think you will never forget, and I'm sure these are images you are trying to get out of your mind, and that is when you approach the scene, and I'm going to show folks at home this photograph from the New York Times, when you were outside the building. If we can go back to the studio, this is quite a photograph in the New York Times today. This is a man falling headfirst, presumably to his death, after jumping from a window of the World Trade Center. And you actually saw scores, I mean scores of people doing this.
No, I think a lot of people, it's difficult to turn away from. There was an enormous wall of flame beneath the area of impact on the first tower, the northmost tower. The flame was creeping up, and I assume people were caught, unable to proceed down through that area, and kept climbing up and up to get away from the heat. And I can only assume the intense heat and smoke inhalation forced these people to do things they would never do. And people were jumping in pairs. People were jumping in streams.
They were holding hands in twos and threes.
They were large groups. It was difficult to describe. Difficult to describe. But intense, and all fell to their death. A lot of pain and a lot of anguish. And luckily, at the time, I proceeded north and just missed the first building that collapsed. And I was probably about 5 or 6 blocks out of harm's way.
And I know that a firefighter, I heard, again, you know, you hear all sorts of stories, but there was a report that a firefighter was actually killed when someone fell on top of him after plunging, you know, many, many floors.
I think it's incredible what the fire department and the paramedics have done, but they were very aggressive in getting to the site. And again, I don't think anybody questioned that the building would ever fall. News crews were down there, and there may have been a few news crews caught as well. No one seemed to want to move. But it was very, very tragic. Very, very tragic.
Well, Harry Crosby and Derek Schwartz, again, you know, we're glad that you are safe. I'm sure your family is extremely relieved, and of course our prayers go out to all those people who have not heard from their loved ones yet and who have no idea where they may be, or if in fact they're still alive. So
well,
we need to remember them.
Thank you.
All right, Harry and Derek, thanks again.
Thanks.
It is 6 minutes after the hour now. Here's Matt.
Katie, of course, emergency workers are still hard at work in Lower Manhattan. Tony Suarez and Phil Aguilgarens are EMS workers who were at the scene. Gentlemen, good morning to you.
Good morning.
How long did you both spend at the scene? And Tony, let me start with you. How long were you there?
It was approximately about 20 minutes or so. We got in, firefighters brought a lady to us that was covered in smut, and we heard an explosion, turned around, commandeered an ambulance, and we left the scene very quickly. It became very dangerous and unstable.
How many people did you see injured mulling about or milling about that area?
Numerous. I'd say in our vicinity there must have been about 10 people. Firefighters, pedestrians, a couple of police officers.
Phil, where were you when the second impact occurred, or where were you when the buildings came down?
Initially, I was in Brooklyn when I saw the first plane hit with my partner, Ellen, and that's when we responded. We were headed over to the west side right in front of the building when the second plane hit, and that's when we had to move and get out of the scene immediately. Everything just started falling down on top of us. And when we pulled over to, I'm assuming it was Liberty Street, that's when people started coming towards us. And that's when we saw a female that was just completely burned from head to toe. It was a horrible sight, and I think if it wasn't for her that we had to take over to Cornell immediately, we wouldn't be here.
Because you would have been in the immediate area when...
Oh, we were in the immediate area, yeah.
When that building came down. Were you seeing a lot of people in shock, Phil?
Oh, the people were just stunned. It was with they had no idea what was going on. They were walking like just aimlessly, you know, looking for whatever they were looking, something, aid, or just trying to get out of there.
Tony, based on what you've seen of the devastation and the wreckage, how hard is it to imagine that we're going to find many survivors in that wreckage?
I mean, we hope for the best, but unfortunately, just seeing it after the aftermath, in my opinion, hopefully we'll get people out, but there's only rubbles left at this time. We pray that, you know, we'll be able to pull out more civilians, firefighters, EMS.
Go ahead, Phil. I thought you were going to say something.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that there's some type of, with the structural pockets left, that maybe we could find, you know, they could find people in. I mean, it's a very delicate situation. You can't just go in there. I mean, these guys are in there right now. I mean, they're just they're trained professionals, and they have to take it time, you know, little by little, because it's a very, very unstable place. So we're just hoping that they could find someone.
As are we. Tony and Phil, thanks very much for your time.
You're welcome. Sure.
As many as 800 people may be dead after American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon on Tuesday. NBC's Jim Mikuszewski is there this morning with the latest. Jim, what's going on?
Well, Matt, the news here still remains grim. Rescue workers say that there were no signs of life from beneath the tons of rubble there in the Pentagon, where you see where that terrorist aircraft flew into the Pentagon almost 24 hours ago now. Now, rescue workers think that there could actually be some people alive in pockets there underneath the rubble, but there's absolutely no way to get at them yet, primarily because some of the fires continue to burn and the damaged area is structurally unsafe. Those cranes you see there have been used to put engineers up above to survey the damage. They've also put in microphones, a series of listening devices, cameras on long poles in an effort to find any possible victims trapped inside, but again, no signs of life. And now the primary mission appears to be to recover the dead. Rescue workers using cadaver dogs worked through the night on the grisly task of searching for the dead. Local fire officials estimate as many as 800 were killed, many still buried in the debris. The Pentagon, the center of America's military power, devastated by a sneak terrorist attack. American Airlines Flight 77 hijacked shortly after takeoff from Dulles Airport, with terrorists at the controls traveling at 600 miles per hour with 6,000 gallons of fuel. The jet slams into the two lower floors of the Pentagon.
It kind of disappeared over this embankment here for a moment, and then huge explosion, flames flying into the air, and just chaos on the road.
I hate to say it, but I did fall apart when it first happened. I was very frightened. This doesn't happen in America. I guess it does.
Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was at work at his desk.
I felt the shock of the airplane hitting the building, went through the building and then out into the area, and they were bringing bodies out that had been injured.
The plane slices deep into the Pentagon, cutting through offices primarily occupied by the Navy and Marines. The upper floors later collapse. The question now, how will the U.S. military respond? Worldwide, American military forces are put at the highest state of alert, ThreatCon Delta. And even as part of the Pentagon burned, military planners continue to review the options. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Hugh Shelton, with a pledge to retaliate against those responsible.
I would tell you up front, I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
The Pentagon has long had a number of contingency plans to attack a variety of Osama bin Laden targets. Those plans are now under serious review. The aircraft carrier Enterprise, headed home from the Persian Gulf, ordered to remain in the area. in case President Bush orders military strikes. Now, before rescue workers can actually enter the most devastated part of this area, engineers are actually going to have to knock down the unstable portions of the building to make it safe for those rescue workers. And local firefighting officials say it could be as long as a week before we know exactly how many people died here, Matt.
But again, Mick, the latest figures you're hearing, it could be up to 800 people. 800
people, civilians and military alike, remain unaccounted for this morning.
Jim Miklaszewski at the Pentagon. Mick, thanks very much. Here's Katie.
Matt, that number is staggering. Meanwhile, all 4 of Tuesday's hijacked flights were headed to California. NBC's George Lewis is at LAX, where 3 of those 4 planes were headed. George, good morning.
Good morning, Katie. LAX remains closed at this hour. The relatives of those aboard the hijacked planes have been taken to 2 nearby hotels by the 2 airlines involved, American and United. They're meeting with grief counselors there. No word yet on when the airport may reopen. But as you said, because all the flights were bound to California, the events back east have had an enormous impact here. Shocked and grieving, the relatives of the airline passengers were quickly escorted to a private area at LA International and later to 2 nearby hotels. Among the passengers bound for Los Angeles, David Angel, the producer of the TV series Frasier, and lawyer and TV commentator Barbara Olson, wife of U.S. Solicitor General Ted Olson. Before her plane crashed into the Pentagon, Olson reportedly called her husband twice on a mobile phone to tell him the jetliner was being hijacked by men with knives, that the crew and all the passengers were being forced to the back of the aircraft. On United Airlines 93, the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania, Tom Burnett, vice president of a medical devices company in Northern California, called his wife and indicated he and other passengers were trying to overcome the hijackers. Father Frank Colachico, a friend of the family.
Yeah, he called on the cell phone and told her that one of the passengers was already dead and that they knew that they were all going to die, and that 2 other men and he were going to try to do something, the conversation, and love you, honey, and that was the end of the conversation.
On the same plane, Mark Bingham called his mother and his aunt.
He just said, I want to let you all know that I love you very, very much in case I don't see you again.
I said that?
That the plane has been taken over by hijackers. And then I said, well, we love you very much too, Mark. Let me go get your mother.
I hope it was quick. I hope he took an active part in thwarting the hijackers.
Last night in Los Angeles, friends of 2 other hijacking victims attended a special church service, turning to their faith to ease the pain of the loss. Now, here at LAX, there are 178 planes on the ground behind me, all stranded when the airport was shut down, as well as the rest of the air travel system in this country. And, pardon me, even if the air traffic system gets back up to speed today, it's going to be a long time sorting out all of those planes, many of them not in cities where they're supposed to be. So air travel is going to be a nightmare for the next few days anyway. Katie?
That's right, George, because a lot of the planes that were en route were diverted to other airports. So many people who are not affected by this but were flying to Los Angeles are in other cities this morning.
Right. People are in other cities, and planes that should be in other cities to take care of passengers' needs there are sitting on the ground here. So it's going to be a big jumble. It's going to take a while to untangle.
All right, George Lewis in Los Angeles. George, thank you very much. Apparently, that is not the case at Chicago O'Hare's airport. Kelly O'Donnell joins us with the latest. Kelly, we had understood that all planes would be grounded until at least noon today. That according to the FAA yesterday. But I understand a plane is taken off from O'Hare?
Much to our surprise, when we heard a jet taking off here, we're right in the flight pattern outside O'Hare, and because of the grounding across the country, of course, we didn't miss it. And we looked at it, it's United Airlines aircraft. We believe it's a 757. In talking to United officials here, they are headquartered in Chicago. They tell us that 2 of their aircraft have taken off in order to reposition. As you and George Lewis have been discussing, because planes were grounded yesterday, landing at airports not their cities of origin or destination, the fleet for all airlines is out of position. So United, giving its first indication that air travel may begin to resume today, is moving some of its aircraft. We've asked officials to tell us how many. They will say at this point at least 2. They wouldn't tell us if crews are on board, but presumably they may be moving flight attendants and other pilots and so forth to get to other airports so that they can begin to assess how to go about picking up the schedule. So here at O'Hare, there has been some movement. Again, 2 aircraft have taken off, both of them belonging to United.
And Kelly, presumably they had to get some kind of special permission from the FAA in order to do this.
I would assume so, and because the air traffic has been quiet except for military aircraft since the FAA ordered it yesterday, I would presume that there's some coordination going on. We've been making calls trying to find out about that, and officials are just reluctant to tell us at this point, or perhaps simply too busy trying to get it organized. But the first signs that travel may resume are at least beginning here at O'Hare.
All right. Kelly O'Donnell in Chicago at Chicago's O'Hare Airport. Kelly, thank you very much. It is 18 past the hour. Now here's Matt.
Katie, thanks. Clifton Cloud lives in downtown Manhattan. He was at the World Trade Center when it was attacked on Tuesday morning, along with his video camera. Clifton, good morning. Nice to have you here.
Good morning.
You were preparing, I know, for a happy occasion.
Correct.
Your son was starting preschool?
Yeah, it was his first day of like pre-kindergarten. So I had my video camera all ready to go to film him in the morning. And I actually left the house without it to go park my car on the roof of this garage. And as I backed into the space, I looked up and I saw this hole in the World Trade Center building. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, you know, this can't be happening. This is, you know, a special effect. It's a movie. And so I ran home to get my video camera just a couple blocks away, came back and started filming. And I was just watching the building, capturing it and thinking about, wow, this is an amazing, you know, situation. And all of a sudden the plane hit the second building. And I didn't even realize that I'd captured the plane hitting it because I was just in shock. This, you know, this couldn't be happening to New York, to, you know, to our icon. And it was shocking.
I can hear you saying, oh my God, oh my God. After the second plane struck the second of the 2 towers, what did you do next?
I had called my wife immediately to let her know where I was. She had taken my son down to school, and then I called my office because my company, ACE, we handle a lot of clients in the building. And right where the plane hit, as a matter of fact, Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter, we do a lot of work. I've been in that building. I've been in the ceilings of that building. We know people there, and I was just, yeah, all of a sudden I realized these people that I know that we work with, you know, hope to God they made it out, because they're wonderful people, and they're New Yorkers, they're hardworking, good people.
I know you were like so many Americans and New Yorkers as we're watching the second tower collapse right there on your home video, who back in '93, after the attack on the World Trade Center, probably took some pride in the fact that the buildings remained standing.
Yeah.
That it was some sort of symbol.
Right.
To try and explain what went through your gut and your heart as you watched those 2 symbols crashing to the ground.
I really thought of the people that I work with, some that actually had appointments there that morning. And I thought of, you know, what is it going to be like to look up and see the damage on the building in the weeks to come? And when it collapsed, I was saying, oh no, because it just, this couldn't be happening to us. But I have to say, this morning I rode my bike up from downtown, and the streets are empty and everything is quiet, and there were so many memories as I rode by, you know, different intersections, and I thought every corner of New York City has a million memories. And when my wife called me to tell me she was pregnant, I was in the lobby of the World Trade Center building, and as I was thinking about all these memories, I was, you know, New Yorkers, you don't live in New York and don't get a beating once in a while, you know, it's a tough town, but we're tough people, and nothing is going to stop New York from rebuilding. And look out.
You know, I'm curious, you're going to have this tape, I'm sure, forever.
Yeah.
Your son is 2.5 years old?
Yeah.
At what time do you think it would be, when are you going to show him this tape and try to explain to him what his dad saw that morning?
Well, I don't know when. Probably
or
when,
how?
You know what? Probably after they opened the new building, and say, Jack, you were in school when this happened, but we rebuilt and we're back. We're here, and I know it's going to happen because I love New York. Everyone loves New York. We're here.
Clifton Cloud, this is amazing footage. We thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Here's Katie.
Incidentally, thank you very much, Matt. About 10 minutes from now, actually about 8 minutes from now, President Bush will be meeting with his national security team, obviously, to discuss this and options. And he will make a statement a little bit later at 10:45 Eastern Time. Of course, we'll continue to cover that. Meanwhile, few people understand terrorism and the mindset of Osama bin Laden, as well as General Norman Schwarzkopf, who was Commander-in-Chief of the United States Forces Central Command during the Gulf War in 1991. General Schwarzkopf, good morning to you.
Oh, Katie.
Well, is there any doubt in your mind, General Schwarzkopf, that Osama bin Laden was behind this?
Yeah, I think there is, Katie. There's an awful lot of terrorist groups out there, and it could be any one of them. Bin Laden certainly has the capability to do it, and would be at the very, very top of the list of suspects, but there's a bunch of other organizations beneath his that are also on the list that can't be ignored.
At the same time, General Schwarzkopf, isn't it true that this really is Osama bin Laden's modus operandi, so to speak? I mean, that he is known for masterminding very coordinated, well thought out, sophisticated efforts? General Schwarzkopf, can you hear me?
I just lost you for a minute, Katie.
Let me just repeat the question. Aren't many intelligence officials thinking that Osama bin Laden was responsible, because this seems to be his MO, his modus operandi, in terms of coordinating very sophisticated, well thought out terrorist attacks?
Exactly. His modus operandi is, number one, to provide the funding that's necessary to do this. Number two, to use, as he did in Africa against our embassies there, he uses local people that he can finance, support, give them the supplies and that sort of thing, and then they ultimately carry out the attack. That's exactly his modus operandi, but it's not his alone. There are others that could do the same thing.
All right, so we've heard a lot from U.S. officials who are understandably, if you've been there when you were, in charge during the Gulf War, they're very cautious and measured. But they have talked about possible U.S. military options. General Schwarzkopf, what do they include?
Well, anything from obviously the, standoff attacks that we could make against targets, all the way up into actual, use of ground forces if the targets presented themselves that way, and if that's the decision of the President of the United States. There's a vast array of alternatives. The toughest part, Katie, of dealing with terrorists is, number one, you got to find out where they are.
Right.
And that's the major challenge. Until you know where they are, you don't have a target to hit. And certainly we can't just go ahead and indiscriminately bomb huge areas without having any idea what it is we're going after. I'm sure that there's an array of alternatives that are available, that have been developed long since by the Joint Chiefs. And now it's a question of selectivity. What enemy are we going after? Where are they located? And then what's the most effective means? And there may be many effective means that could be utilized against them. And then it's a question of which one you're going to utilize.
So in other words, it could be a multifaceted approach with a lot of different resources being brought to bear. You mentioned actually finding these individuals, bin Laden perhaps, or some other terrorist leader and his associates. And we cannot really emphasize enough how difficult that is.
Well, it's worse than the needle in the haystack. But as I said, there are several groups out there, any one of which could be responsible for it. They've got support bases. That's one of the most valuable targets to go after, because these things don't happen without support. Somebody got them to the airport. Somebody fed them their breakfast, the dinner the night before, provided shelter over their heads, right here in our own country. So obviously there is a group of people here that were a support base for this organization, and then it goes all the way back to the home organization, wherever it might be, and who's supplying whatever they were supplied. So it's a very, very, very difficult, tedious process, and we shouldn't jump to conclusions. I hate to say it, but remember when Oklahoma City first happened, everybody said, well, this was, Islamic terrorists that did it, and it turned out it was a home-cooked operation. So I think that we have to be cautious and really let the people who know the business well do what they do well, and they'll find out who's responsible.
Although, General Schwarzkopf, we should point out that those 5 Arab individuals who were tracked down at Logan Airport in Boston, 2 with passports from the United Arab Emirates, I mean, there are some indications that these might, in fact, be individuals who are not within our borders, who do not live in the United States. And again, we shouldn't jump to conclusions about that. You know, I talked to Sandy Berger, the former National Security Advisor during the Clinton administration, as he left the studio this morning, because we need to think ahead, too, because if we engage militarily with whomever or against whomever, the United States also has to prepare for some kind of retaliation. And what kind of weapons, for example, of mass destruction, do some of these individuals, whether it's Osama bin Laden or someone else, have access to?
Well, I'd like to hope that they don't. Weapons of mass destruction there are many different kinds. If you're talking about nuclear weapons that somebody may have gotten out of the Soviet Union, that's a possibility, but very, very, very slim. It's one thing to have a missile like that. It's another thing to be able to utilize it. But there's a lot of other alternatives that they could come up with. And I think our military people and our national security people are well aware of the options, and I think are capable of doing something about that.
General Norman Schwarzkopf, General Schwarzkopf, thanks very much. It's great to see you again, but again, under the worst circumstances possible. I'm sure, like so many Americans, you woke up this morning still incredulous that this had actually happened.
Yeah, Katie, it's a combination of deep sorrow, but also deep rage, and you can't help but feel that inside, you know, a sense of frustration that we've got to do something about this. Let me give you a thought, though, that I think is very important. A lot of people have criticized what we did in Iraq in Desert Storm, but the truth of the matter is we went to extraordinary limits to try and avoid any civilian casualties, to try and avoid, even at the risk of greater risk to our own pilots. But you look at these bastards and what they did yesterday. They deliberately went after civilians and innocent people, and that's what makes the difference between us and them.
General Norman Schwarzkopf. General Schwarzkopf, thank you very much. It is 29 minutes after the hour. Now here's Matt.
All right, Katie. Just moments ago, Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres spoke with WNBC's Gabe Pressman. We want to show you now what he had to say.
Do you see this as a cataclysm of biblical proportions, what happened here in New York?
Yes, I think from time to time, history put us at test to see how can we handle uninvited catastrophes, unbelievable agonies, and remain what we should be, a people that believes in the basics of our existence, namely the foundation of values of the gospel.
You're optimistic that out of this carnage, out of these thousands of people who have perished, some good may yet come?
It's more than optimistic. I believe America can handle this situation as well, this nature of the confrontation. America is a great country, and once America will decide to get itself organized, and there's nobody else in the world that can replace the United States of America, and may I say with my full heart, God bless America, America can really organize the necessary camp on the global dimension to handle terror, not when it arrives to the city or to the airport, but at the moment when the terrorists are leaving their first location, to intercept them because before they will become a horror. And I'm sure the United States is determined and strong, intellectually convinced, administratively organized, and that will be the result of this terrible catastrophe.
Israel, through the Mossad and other agencies, is very sensitive to intelligence involving terrorists. Do you have any information, direct or indirect, as to whether it was bin Laden or who it was that organized this attack?
We have a general idea who bin Laden is. and we got general warnings. We didn't have a specific one, and any piece of information that we shall have will clearly be transferred to your agencies.
But you can't tell us whether or not such information was passed at some point in the last couple of weeks.
We didn't have any specific warning, and the other warnings that we have had were passed over.
Well, thank you, Mr. Perez. Do you have any last word to the people of New York and this area?
Be strong and be great, like New York always has been and always will remain so. God bless you.
You're a poet, I know, sometimes. You have tried your hand at poetry. Is there a poetic?
Well, there are
What's that?
Well, there are times when the heart speaks, not only the mind.
Not words.
And I try to express, yes, I try to express a little bit of our feelings.
We appreciate very much your coming aboard this morning here in New York. Thank you very much, Mr. Foreign Minister.
Thank you.
That was Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres talking to WNBC TV's Gabe Pressman. Rescue efforts have been going on for about 24 hours now. Some reports are that 300 firefighters may have perished. One firefighter who was at the scene was Parish Kelly. Mr. Kelly, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
I want you to try to explain to me and describe the scene after the second plane hit World Trade Center Tower number 2, and describe for me how many firefighters would have been on the scene, where they would have been in that plaza and in that building.
I can't answer that, Matt. I was actually in Massachusetts working at the time when I saw the second plane hit. I decided to get my vehicle and head to New York after the second tower collapsed because I just knew that there were many, many rescue personnel on the ground, and I just felt compelled to get in my vehicle and come down here and do whatever I could. When you get to the scene, the devastation of the emergency personnel, you come across maybe 20 pieces of fire apparatus that are completely burned out. It's nothing more than the shell. Cruisers, police cruisers are just stacked on top of each other. They're just burnt out pieces of shells. Something down there happened that was just very, very devastating.
You say you drove down from Massachusetts. We all remember a short while ago in Worcester, Massachusetts, that fire that claimed the lives of so many firefighters. But when you hear that up to 300 firefighters may be missing, unaccounted for, and may have perished in this disaster, what goes through your mind?
I just heard that for the first time. I knew there were many, but I didn't hear any figures. We lost 6 up in Worcester, and New York sent an entourage up. They were very supportive, so that's why I felt compelled to come down this way. I cannot even imagine how many emergency personnel. You're talking about firefighters. There were police officers, EMS. There might have been nurses and doctors that came to the scene. I can't even imagine how many rescuers that perished in this. I can't even fathom.
We have to remember that after both planes struck those towers, there was a lot of fire in the buildings, and people sometimes forget that firefighters don't do their jobs in a building like that from the ground or from trucks or something like that. They've got to get inside those buildings to try and put those fires out.
That is correct. From what I understand, the 2 gentlemen that we pulled out from the rubble, one last night and one this morning, from what I understand, they were both inside the building attempting rescue operations. And from what I understand, and this isn't confirmed, but it came from another Port Authority employee, that they actually rode the building down. So they were in the structure when it collapsed.
Some of the firefighters and police officers have been working, as I mentioned, for about 24 hours now, Mr. Kelly, and while they are obviously exhausted, we've been hearing reports that they don't want to leave the scene because so many of their brothers and sisters are still in that rubble. That's something you hear a lot when you talk to firefighters.
That is correct. I was on the line with about 200 other emergency personnel with the concentrated effort of the 2 rescue attempts. The one last evening, and then we switched our approach to get into a better angle. and then we obviously pulled out the second survivor this morning. We did not want to leave. They physically came in and took the equipment out of our hand and had us come off the line. We've been out there for no less than 12 hours, and they asked us to come off the line. And they're sending in some reinforcements now.
All right, Parish Kelly. Mr. Kelly, thanks very much. Our best luck to you during the day ahead.
Yeah, my thoughts and prayers go out to the families. This is just incredible, and until you get down to the scene, I see the helicopter. There's still a lot of heavy fire and smoke down there. Until these shots get back to the nation, I don't think anybody can fathom what we just saw down there.
We thank you for your time, Mr. Kelly. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Here's Katie.
Okay, Matt, thanks very much. Larry Johnson is the former Deputy Director of the State Department Office of Counterterrorism. Mr. Johnson, good morning.
Morning, Katie.
You know, we spoke about 24 hours ago after this happened. We did not, you emphasized not jumping to conclusion that this was some terrorist act. Obviously, this morning, you believe that's the appropriate conclusion to draw.
Yes, absolutely. I've spoken with some people in the government, and they've indicated that there was, in fact, some advanced intelligence. It was general, but it was pointing to the fact that Osama bin Laden was training and was putting personnel through training in aviation. And so clearly, you didn't have to train people in this to take, how to take off and land a plane, just to maintain airspeed and to be able to steer the plane. And unfortunately, it looks like that's the case. You don't have any other group in the world that's connected with doing something like that.
So you're pretty convinced, Larry, that that Osama bin Laden's fingerprints are all over this?
Yeah, and again, I'm not a reflexive, let's hate Osama bin Laden and he's the villain of the moment. But when you look at the incidents that have occurred over the last 10 years, and you look at the people that are killing Americans and calling for the death of Americans, Osama accounts for about 80% of that activity. And he has been the only one willing to take these kinds of casualties to kill innocents. The other folks are fairly, they don't, guerrillas in Colombia and in Turkey and even Hezbollah and Hamas have not gone out and aggressively attacked Americans. So I think it's the past behavior coupled with the recent threats that leaves no other conclusion.
Let me go back to something you said just a moment ago. You talked about advanced intelligence.
Right.
Can you be more specific about any kind of communiques or messages that were somehow intercepted that perhaps in hindsight should have been taken more seriously?
Well, yeah, that's the problem with this, because unfortunately the way the intelligence usually gets on people's desks is it would be one thing if it said we're going to attack 4 aircraft originating in these airports at this time on this date, then of course the United States could take action. Unfortunately, what I have seen over the last 20 years is you get fragments that only after the fact do you say, oh, that's what it meant. And I'm afraid, unfortunately, that's what we're going to find in this case, that there was not, the tidbits that were available were not sufficient to take action on.
Well, is that the way it is? I mean, do we have to just live with that, or can we somehow beef up U.S. intelligence so these can be interpreted more accurately or taken more seriously?
Well, Ambassador Bremer made a point earlier on your show, and he's exactly right. I mean, I've got several friends who are in the intelligence community who have been in places where these terrorist acts have occurred. And what they've told me is basically they can no longer go into the sewer to find the rats. We're staying out of the sewers. We don't want to get ourselves dirty. We want to be very antiseptic and clean on this. And consequently, because we are so risk averse, because we're so afraid of getting sullied with someone who is an unsavory character, we are not in a position to collect this. The world has changed since the Cold War. It was 20 years ago you could go to cocktail parties, try to recruit Soviet agents there. But these people that are attacking us, recognizing they are a small group, they are religious fanatics, and they're not hanging out at cocktail parties and diplomatic functions.
So how do you infiltrate these cells? I mean, how do you use, modern-day spies to figure out what these people are up to?
Okay, one thing you have to do, and again, we've got to be willing to have the stomach to do this. We've got to be willing to put people in place for long-term positions, to have them penetrate religious organizations, sometimes having to portray themselves as members of the media. Right now, if you're an intelligence operative, you can't be a member of the media. You can never go out and represent yourself as such. And you can't go out and represent yourself as a member of the clergy. Now, you know, it's nice to talk in theory that, oh boy, we want to penetrate this, but when we get down to where the hard decisions have to be made, we shy away. But when you're looking at 20,000, possibly 20,000 bodies lying there, you know, at some point, I think this is like Pearl Harbor. It will have the same effect on us. Before World War II started, we still had horse cavalry. You couldn't get rid of the old vestiges that no longer were relevant. And unfortunately, we have the equivalent in the intelligence community today of the horse cavalry. And maybe this incident will provoke us to be able to make the changes that need to be made.
All right. Larry Johnson. Mr. Johnson, thanks for talking with us this morning.
Thank you, Katie.
The financial market should have opened moments ago here in New York, but today is not a normal day, of course. CNBC's Ron Insana covers the markets and was at the World Trade Center when one of the towers collapsed. Hey, Ron, how you doing this morning?
Katie.
When will the markets reopen?
It appears that tomorrow is a likely day for the New York Stock Exchange to reopen. The chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Harvey Pitt, has said publicly he believes there's a reasonable chance the markets will open tomorrow. I talked to a staffer at the SEC just a few minutes ago. He too shares that belief and said that while no formal announcement has yet been made and no formal decision has been made, it is likely we could see something later in the day to that effect.
Has Wall Street pretty much been shut down today in terms of everybody who works down there with investment banks, et cetera?
Well, everything below Canal Street, which is at the southern tip of Manhattan and just north of the World Trade Center area, is inoperative. So yes, the New York Stock Exchange is shut. I've even tried to make calls there earlier this morning and no one is yet picking up the phone. So the building is not occupied. Foreign markets have shown actually a fair degree of resilience this morning after the Asian markets were beaten up overnight last night in response to this. In Europe today, the markets are far calmer. We see very flat activity. All the exchanges of Europe have stopped for a moment or two of silence to express their sympathies for the victims here in the United States. But a far calmer day in Europe today than it was yesterday.
I understand the gold market's up.
Gold market was up yesterday rather decidedly. So was the oil markets. Those markets which investors often flee to during times of crisis are backing off a little bit this morning. We're not seeing the same type of kind of panic or rush to get into hard assets as we did yesterday throughout the day.
What is the impact of all this on the economy? I mean, you really even hate to bring that up given the enormous human toll and the people who are suffering so much right now. But the market closing, all these businesses shut down. What is the impact?
Well, I mean, clearly the collateral damage is less significant than the human toll. But as we were discussing yesterday, this attack was aimed at maximizing not just the loss of life or the political impact, but the economic impact as well. Shutting down Wall Street is a large event because 1/3 of the nation's financial transactions are routed through New York. You have a whole host of firms that are no longer have a presence in the World Trade Center. Everybody from Morgan Stanley, which had 3,500 employees, as you noted, has several trading floors. Cantor Fitzgerald, Lehman Brothers had 2 floors that were operational
Merrill Lynch had some offices there, didn't they? The retail side,
yes,
I think?
absolutely. And those exist no longer. So effectively shutting down a nerve center in the financial community is a large-scale event. Additionally, economists are debating now whether this level of uncertainty about our own security, about the way New Yorkers will behave in their own city, the way people will behave in terms of air travel, that could have a rather noticeable impact on the economy at a time when consumer confidence was already fragile.
So this could have enormous psychological ramifications, which could translate into an economic result.
Absolutely, but by the same token, economists always look at this from 2 entirely different perspectives. There are those negatives that we just discussed. The positives include the fact that every central bank in the world right now are suggesting they will provide ample funds for their economies and their markets to function efficiently. There will be rebuilding efforts, obviously, in New York. Congress may spend more money to blunt the impact of this event as well. So it's hard to assess whether or not it'll be a catastrophe economically.
Plus, we've witnessed, I mean, if you talk about psychology, an incredible surge of patriotism. And this has been an enormously unifying event with so many Americans rallying around the president, rallying around each other, feeling, you know, really as a whole in a way that they haven't felt probably in a long time.
And wartime economies, if that's what we're going into, and some economists, you know, speculate that we will see an increase in defense spending, we will see sorts of activities from the federal government that require a great deal of spending that could have a positive economic impact down the road. Wartime economies tend to be reasonably strong.
Robust.
And you know, for the wrong reasons, unfortunately, but it's the truth about those environments. And so far, you know, we don't know exactly how this will play out, but there's a list of negatives and there is a list of unfortunate positives that go along with events like this.
Meanwhile, we should mention that you were in the area. Tell us again, for people who might not have watched yesterday, your personal situation.
Well, an MSNBC cameraman whom I met on the street, I believe on Broadway, relatively close to the World Trade Center, and I were trying to get from the east side of the Trade Center area to the west side where we knew our colleagues were stationed to join the coverage there. And as we moved, I believe we're about a block south of the Trade Center, as we moved towards the building, we saw the top of the South Tower begin to blow out. And we turned and ran.
This is right before it collapsed.
This is right before it collapsed. And as we turned away, he ran straight down one street. I made a right. And you saw, as you did in the movie Independence Day, this plume of smoke barrel down that corridor and began to engulf the entire area.
You know, we should explain to people who live outside of New York that these buildings are like wind tunnels, you know, on a windy day where you can just get sort of blown away. And so all the debris and all the smoke just came, as you said, like a plume just charging.
Like a tornado.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I ducked behind a car as I made a right around the corner, and the environment around me got increasingly black, and the air was quite thick, and fortunately I got into an open car and managed to wait there till things cleared up just a bit.
All right. Well, Ron and Sana, Ron, thank you. I know you'll never forget yesterday.
Absolutely not.
Thank you so much. Right now, Mayor Giuliani is speaking. Let's listen.
It's going to take some time, and we're bringing generators in. The governor made available to us a group of generators that we've moved to Randall's Island, and we will be using them in that area of the east side that needs generator power, because they may need it for quite some time. We were able to move 120 dump trucks out of the city last night, which will give you a sense of the work that was done overnight. So some of the debris has already been removed. More of it is being removed, and it'll be done by barge all throughout the day today. The subway system is operating in all of the city, but below 14th Street, and largely because right now we have that closed. So if you're in any of the other 4 boroughs, public transportation is normal, the subways are normal, the buses are normal. If you're in Manhattan, the subways are going to be working to 14th Street, and then for those that go underneath, they'll just go straight out to Brooklyn. As soon as we can get that area of the city open, however, there will be subway service there, except for the 1, 2, and 3 lines, the West Side IRT below 34th Street, because of the collapse that took place. And again, we ask all New Yorkers to cooperate and to try to help each other. There are going to be a lot of people today who need help and need assistance, either because of the fact that they know people that were lost in this terrible tragedy, or because they're just frightened of what may happen. If you could comfort them and help them and assist them, particularly elderly people, that might be a way in which you can contribute. And we're getting very, very close cooperation from the state, from the federal government. I think people in New York, the best way they can deal with this right now is not only to deal with their own grief, which we all feel and have, but to show that we're not going to be in any way affected by this, that we're not going to be cowed by it, that we're not afraid, that we're going to go about our business and lead normal lives and not let these cowards affect us in any way like they're trying to do, which is to instill fear in us. Governor?
That was Mayor Giuliani speaking at a press conference just downtown, short distance from here. He talked about the need to help other people and comfort other people because they might be afraid. That's particularly true. He mentioned older people, but it would also be true with younger people, children. Dominic Capello is the author of the book called 10 Talks Parents Must Have with Their Children About Violence. Dominic, good morning. Good to have you back.
Good morning.
It's so hard. I mean, students were taken out of school yesterday. Schools were closed. You know, they've had things like that happen in the past for snow days, for storms. But if they turned on TV, Dominic, they saw some horrific images. How do parents deal with that?
Oh, well, I should say there were the parents who were watching on TV, and there were the parents that I saw who were actually by the Hudson River, downtown in Manhattan, with their children, watching the buildings collapse. And I have to tell you, to be quite honest, I was very struck as I was out there watching teenagers and parents with infants and 5-year-olds watching the building collapse, and I could only imagine what they were feeling. I certainly was feeling extraordinarily sad, and I think that as you're wondering, how do America's parents talk to their children? I don't think there's an educator or a parent or an adult in America who is prepared for this. I think we've learned some things about how to deal with death and dying. I've certainly spent time writing books about violence. It's hard to imagine how you even begin a conversation. There are some things that we can recommend.
We'll get to those in a second. Violence is one subject, but what about children who are now looking at every tall building in the city saying, Mommy, I don't want to go in that building. I don't want to go near that building. Absolutely. Because it could fall on me.
Right, and we're also hearing that kids don't want their parents getting on airplanes. And I did talk to some parents actually in Brooklyn and talked, have you talked to your kids? And they were all watching the news together, which I think is a good idea. If children will watch the news, they should be watching it with their parents. And a 7-year-old girl turned to her dad and said, Daddy, are you scared? And the dad said, yes, I am scared. And the mother was crying and said, Mommy, why are you crying? And she said, I'm very sad. And I think this touches on parents being able to talk about their feelings and being able to express their feelings so that children know it's okay for them to express their feelings.
How do parents explain to their children that there are people out there who simply want to kill innocent people?
It's hard to imagine a response. I talked to a wonderful mother I know who lives in the Upper West Side, and she has a 6-year-old son. And she said she felt she needed to talk with him because she felt he would go back to school and the kids would be talking at school, and she wanted him to hear from her. She said that sometimes there are very bad people in the world, and these bad people have done something very bad. They took over some planes and crashed it into a building, and many, many innocent people were hurt, and this is very bad. And the little boy said, are they going to catch those people? And she said, yes, we will find those people.
It's important to explain to children also, I would imagine, that this is a rare occurrence.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is not something that happens, and as I said, most Americans can't fathom this happening. We have to reassure children, and we have to reassure ourselves as adults. We are also looking up in the sky and looking up at the buildings and say this is not something that happens every day, but I caution us just because I think some of us are wondering, is this the end? Or are we beginning war? So I don't want to try to paint a rosy picture.
By the way, that children are hearing, if they're listening to TV, they're hearing words like war and more and terror and things like that.
Right. I think what we want parents to understand is first that it's a complicated situation. It's a crisis situation. Parents do understand that children are looking to them for guidance, for security, and again, I would encourage parents to not feel like they're alone. They have their communities of faith. They have their schools. I got a call from a PTA mother yesterday who said, should I put on a meeting for the parents? That's a good idea.
Real quickly, just 30 seconds left. Also important for parents to talk about not lashing out, their children not lashing out against certain ethnic groups?
Absolutely. I got a call from a woman in Washington, D.C. who was concerned that her kids may get the wrong idea. There were some clips showing some people in the Middle East celebrating this, and her teenage sons were furious and very angry. So this is not a time, this is a time for tolerance and to let our government follow the laws and the international laws.
All right, Dominic, if you will stick around, we want to talk to you more throughout the day.
Thank you.
Right now, let's go back to Katie.
All right, Matt, thank you very much. The images on television and in our newspapers over the last 24 hours have been hard, even impossible to believe. The financial heart of America attacked, the ultimate symbol of the U.S. military attacked. Here on this Wednesday morning, a nation is still reeling.
We have a breaking story, though.
Apparently, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center here in New York City. It happened just a few moments ago, apparently. We have very little information available.
It's quite terrifying. I'm in shock right now. It's mind-boggling, and it's horrifying.
A hijacked American Airlines flight out of Boston slams into the North Tower of New York's World Trade Center at approximately 8:42 a.m. Eastern Time.
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building, and there's been another collision. Can you see it? I can see it on this shot.
A second airplane, a 727, just ran into the building. It's now approximately 9:03 a.m.
Oh, my God!
Forget about the damn car. Let's go.
It felt just a few moments ago like there was an explosion of some kind here at the Pentagon.
9:40 a.m., a third hijacked plane, an American flight out of Washington Dulles, crashes into the Pentagon in a burst of flames.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
The FAA has banned all takeoffs at all airports across America.
We just saw a live picture of what seemed to be a portion of the building falling away from the World Trade Center.
9:59 a.m. The until now unthinkable. The South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses.
It's about the year in combat. Never saw anything like this. Sure, a lot of people died, but nothing this devastating.
The other tower of the World Trade Center has just collapsed.
There's been a declaration of war by terrorists in the United States.
You didn't have time to look at, you know, you just running for your life, really.
There was smoke everywhere and people are jumping out the windows.
The city of New York in the United States of America is much stronger than any group of barbaric terrorists.
We will find the people responsible for these cowardly acts, and justice will be done.
These are Palestinian celebrations in the wake of Tuesday's terror attacks in the United States. Apparently, Palestinians took to the street chanting, "God is great."
The alleged mastermind, America's most wanted terrorist, Osama bin Laden.
Certainly in more than 20 years of covering horrific events, this is something that I've never seen before.
I got hold of a video camera and began recording, you know, some of what had happened.
We're looking at those images right now.
Yeah.
So you're looking through your viewfinder watching the tower collapse.
Yeah, and you can see I'm not very far away. I mean, they see that big chunk of the building, and this cloud starts moving real fast.
We're all crying, hysterical. We were wanting to get out of there and not knowing where to go and which direction to run in and how far we can go. And I'm still worried about my life. Yeah, it's horrifying.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong.
This is wild.
Through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Good morning. America may never be the same, and this is why. A beautiful Tuesday morning turned tragic when American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And that was just the beginning. This morning, just over 24 hours later, the heart of commerce and the signature of the New York skyline is no more. The nerve center of the U.S. military deliberately and viciously attacked, leaving a nation and the rest of the world stunned today, Wednesday, September the 12th, 2001.
From NBC News, this is Today with Katie Couric and Matt Lauer.
And welcome to Today on this Wednesday morning, a morning people are waking up in disbelief with unbelievably heavy hearts, especially those who have lost loved ones or who are uncertain where their loved ones are. I'm Katie Couric.
And I'm Matt Lauer. Tuesday morning did start off beautifully. It was a gorgeous day until 8:42 a.m. Eastern Time when that happened. Horrible pictures. This was a scene 25 hours ago. Airplanes intentionally plunging into the World Trade Center. We still don't know how high the human toll will climb.
But the early numbers, Matt, are staggering. 266 people on the 4 hijacked planes are dead. 2 hit the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, 1 hit the Pentagon, and 1 crashed 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. At the Pentagon, up to 800 people are now feared dead. In New York City, Mayor Rudy Giuliani says the toll could be more than any of us can bear. The New York Fire Commissioner said that he is missing 300 firefighters and EMS personnel. 33 New York police officers are missing. Estimates are that there were up to 50,000 people working in the World Trade Center on Tuesday morning when the attacks took place.
And the stories of some of those people escaping the building are harrowing. A glimmer, and I mean a glimmer of hope. Word is that some victims have survived in Lower Manhattan. Cell phone calls coming from the rubble, and people still alive pulled out from inside that wreckage. At this point, there are 2 makeshift morgues being set up in Lower Manhattan, and there are also some heartbreaking reports of passengers on those 4 doomed planes calling loved ones to report that they'd been hijacked, and in some cases to say, I love you and goodbye.
And Matt, we're beginning to get a picture of the terror on those planes before they crashed. Flight attendants being stabbed, passengers herded to the back of the planes, and now new developments overnight in Boston where 2 of the flights originated. 5 suspects have been identified and a car seized from the Logan Airport parking lot, but there still is much we do not know and may not know for a very long time. The president spoke to the nation last night.
The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve.
That was President Bush speaking to the nation from the Oval Office last night. We are going to cover this story all morning long. Let's begin with NBC's David Bloom, who's close to the rescue efforts this morning. David?
Matt, there are conflicting accounts this morning as to how many people may have been pulled alive from the rubble. We know that 3 people for sure are safe. 2 New York City police officers, also a New York City Fire Department official pulled from the rubble early this morning. Essentially, Matt, more than 25 hours after the first explosions, you can still see the smoke billowing behind me, and there are 3 basic problems that the rescuers say they're confronting. Number 1, you can still see them throwing a large amount of water on these buildings because there are still fires burning this morning. Second issue, far more significant, the rescuers tell us, is the unstable nature of the surrounding buildings. They are desperately worried about more buildings collapsing, so they're proceeding very gingerly. The third issue is just the remaining debris, so much so that it's making it impossible to conduct a thorough search and rescue effort. They're merely going into caverns where they're hoping that they might still find people alive, but it is a cruelly slow process. Overnight in New York City, a faint glimmer of hope. At least 2 victims pulled alive from the rubble. And there may be others still trapped inside the World Trade Center's collapsed remains. Reports of cell phone calls from a few survivors pleading for help.
We do know there are people in the building that are alive. We know that for a fact. We're very hopeful that there are pockets where there are people, not only the ones that we know about, but hopefully others.
But elsewhere, the news is grim. The president last night puts the death toll from the attacks in the thousands after an estimated 12 to 20 terrorists wielding makeshift knives hijacked 4 domestic airliners. Brand new video obtained overnight shows the first attack plane crashing into the World Trade Center's North Tower. Minutes later, television helicopters record the second plane crashing into the South Tower. The 2 110-story buildings so badly damaged that they collapse, one after the other. Among the missing, the rescuers themselves. Last night, New York City firefighters and police confirmed that more than 300 of their own are believed dead. And at the Pentagon, site of the third plane attack. Firefighters last night say the death toll could rise to as high as 800 people. Last night, Air Force One, escorted by 2 fighter jets, returns President Bush to Washington, where he brands the attacks evil and despicable, vowing that America will win the war against terrorism. With Saudi-born terrorist Osama bin Laden the prime suspect, Mr. Bush makes a thinly veiled threat of reprisal against his backers in Afghanistan.
We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
The 2 hijacked planes which toppled the World Trade Center both originated out of Boston, where this morning the Boston Herald reports that authorities have identified at least 5 Arab men as suspects, one of them a trained pilot, and that a car laden with Arabic language flight training manuals was found at Logan Airport's central parking garage. As to bin Laden's suspected role, Senator Orrin Hatch tells the Associated Press that the United States intercepted communications between bin Laden's supporters discussing targets that were hit, and that at least one of the suspected hijackers had known ties to the terrorists. One of the biggest mysteries, why did the 4th hijacked plane not hit a target, crashing instead in western Pennsylvania? One possible explanation, a passenger on the doomed flight reportedly called his wife, telling her, "We're all going to die. I love you," but indicating that he and 2 other passengers had decided to try to overpower the hijackers. Attorney General John Ashcroft told Congress last night that that plane is believed to have been headed for Washington, D.C.
Residents are being allowed.
But again, by far the greatest loss of life here in Lower Manhattan in New York City. Authorities tell us that of those 2 Port Authority officers rescued last night, one of them had to have a leg amputated in order to be pulled from the rubble alive. Very scant reports this morning, very slim hope that anyone could have survived the actual collapse of those buildings. Most of the hope surrounds those who may have been trapped in the basement or some other pockets where there might still be faint hope of survivors. Matt?
All right, David. NBC's David Bloom near the rescue operations in Lower Manhattan. Here's Katie.
Matt, thank you very much. President Bush is right now meeting with his national security staff, and obviously he is busy talking with them, and he will be making a statement within the hour, and that is the U.S. Capitol, a live picture of the House of Representatives. Congressman Dick Armey speaking, showing solidarity behind the president. The nation is also rallying behind President Bush today as he works around the clock trying to find out who is responsible for Tuesday's devastating attacks. NBC White House correspondent Campbell Brown reports.
The lights were on at the White House well after midnight as the president's national security team sifted through the latest intelligence, honing in on who was behind the attacks, preparing the U.S. response. In his address to the nation, the president issued a strong warning to any country that might aid the terrorists.
We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
White House officials say it was the president's decision to return to Washington. As Bush arrived at the White House, aides described his demeanor as somber but even-keeled. His message to the country, American strength will overcome.
This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time.
As Tuesday's attacks began, the president was preparing to speak to school children in Sarasota, Florida. He first got word a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center from Chief of Staff Andy Card, then a phone call from National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, then a second crash. Card whispered in the president's ear, Bush's reaction, one of shock. Immediately, the Secret Service activated an emergency plan to protect the president. He took off on Air Force One, but his destination was kept secret. The plane became a flying command center, Bush's first call to Vice President Cheney. Cheney, Rice, and the president's national security team huddled in the White House Situation Room. But the scene outside on the White House grounds, chaos, as all other staff and press are rushed out in a mass evacuation. Fire trucks blazed down Pennsylvania Avenue. Crowds gathered in the streets as buildings nearby were evacuated. Air Force One brought the president to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where the president vowed to retaliate.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Minutes later, Air Force One took off again, the destination again a secret. Early afternoon, the plane landed in Nebraska at the U.S. Strategic Command Center near Omaha. Bush went into a bunker to talk to his national security team by live video conference. Fighter jets escorted Air Force One back to Washington. From the plane, he fielded calls from world leaders and spoke twice with First Lady Laura Bush, telling his wife he would soon see her at home.
Join his state.
The symbol of America's military might is the massive Pentagon, home to this country's top military brass. Tuesday, terror from above rained down on them. Jim Mikoszewski, our Pentagon correspondent, was inside the building when American Airlines Flight 77 was deliberately crashed into that building. Jim, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt. And unfortunately, the news here remains grim. Rescue workers over the past 12 hours or so say they have detected no signs of life in the tons of rubble that you see behind us. Using listening devices and cameras on long poles, they could just detect no movement, no signs of life anywhere. One of the problems, of course, is that fires continue to burn here. That hampers any kind of recovery efforts. And the building itself is still unstable. Local firefighting officials say that before they can even get their men anywhere close to the center of that site, they're going to have to actually knock down those unstable parts of the building before they can begin to recover the dead. Rescue workers using cadaver dogs worked through the night on the grisly task of searching for the dead. Local fire officials estimate as many as 800 were killed, many still buried in the debris. The Pentagon, the center of America's military power, devastated by a sneak terrorist attack. American Airlines Flight 77 hijacked shortly after takeoff from Dulles Airport, with terrorists at the controls traveling at 600 miles per hour with 6,000 gallons of fuel. The jet slams into the two lower floors of the Pentagon.
It kind of disappeared over this embankment here for a moment, and then huge explosion, flames flying into the air, and just chaos on the road.
I hate to say it, but I did fall apart when it first happened. I was very frightened. This doesn't happen in America. I guess it does.
Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was at work at his desk.
I felt the shock of the airplane hitting the building, went through the building and then out into the area, and they were bringing bodies out that had been injured.
The plane slices deep into the Pentagon, cutting through offices primarily occupied by the Navy and Marines. The upper floors later collapse. The question now, how will the U.S. military respond? Worldwide, American military forces are put at the highest state of alert, ThreatCon Delta. And even as part of the Pentagon burned, military planners continue to review the options. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Hugh Shelton, with a pledge to retaliate against those responsible.
I would tell you up front, I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
The Pentagon has long had a number of contingency plans to attack a variety of Osama bin Laden targets. Those plans are now under serious review. The aircraft carrier Enterprise, headed home from the Persian Gulf, ordered to remain in the area in case President Bush orders military strikes. And there's still plenty of military activity underway here stateside. AWACS radar planes and fighter jets continue to patrol the skies of several major metropolitan areas in the United States, primarily here on the East Coast. And the aircraft carrier George Washington is steaming up toward the New York area to provide any kind of assistance, primarily medical, that it can. Matt?
Mick, try to explain the impact for me, if you will. When this flight came in, it struck the outer ring, obviously, of the Pentagon. How far was the penetration?
Well, as you can see, well, it's partly obscured by smoke now. The outer portion of the Pentagon is the E ring. It's made up of 5 rings from the middle, A, B, C, D, E. And what happened is that when the 757 came in almost parallel to the Pentagon wall there on this west side, it suddenly took a very sharp 90-degree flip on its right side and turned directly in to the Pentagon. It penetrated the Pentagon on the first and second floors, penetrating first through the E ring, then there's an open space, D ring, open space, C ring, and the impact finally stopped right at the B ring. Several military officers who I know who were at that B ring said they were blown out of their chairs and they looked up to see flames against their window, but fortunately the force of the impact stopped right there, but penetrated quite deep into the Pentagon. Then it was some time after that, after it took out the first and second floors, that the third, fourth, and fifth floors above it then collapsed unto itself, and that's what we see behind us. You know, eerily reminiscent of the kind of pictures we saw after the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City, this gaping hole and the collapsed walls or floors on an angle that sort of, and actually pancaked on each other.
You talked yesterday briefly, Mick, about some renovations that had been done to the building, and in some ways they were trying to shore up the structure of that building. Can you explain that?
Well, it was after the Pentagon was due for a renovation anyway, slowly but surely. It's going to take about 10 to 12 years to complete. But they decided, look, as long as we're doing this, let's do it right. So the portion to the right of the blast area is actually that area that had been renovated already. And when they rebuilt that area, they put in reinforced blast walls on the outer E ring.
Right.
They are meant to deflect a bomb, but nothing strong enough to deflect an airplane, Matt.
All right, Mick, thank you very much. We want to go inside the Pentagon now. A briefing is taking place. Tori Clark, who's a Pentagon spokesperson, is addressing the press.
Excuse me, and the Arlington County Fire Chief, Ed Plogger. And I'd like to have each of them come up, make some brief comments, and hold your questions to the end. So, David?
Tori, thank you very much. As you all know, the Department of Defense family has taken a terrible and tragic loss within the last 24 hours, and our deep sympathy goes out to the families of those most directly affected by these tragic events. On the positive side, I am truly impressed by the spirit of the people in this department and the way they have rallied around, both yesterday and this morning, coming back into this building. I do have, for those who have offices in the area bounded by corridors 2 through 6, which, as you know, are not usable at this juncture, we simply ask they call their supervisors for instructions on where they're supposed to go if they've not already received those instructions. I also want to give the department's thanks both to our own people and to the nation at large for the extraordinary, truly extraordinary response in donating blood. It's just terrific. And it shows how Americans will pull together in a crisis. We are establishing, it is now open at the Sheraton Crystal City, 1800 Jefferson Davis Highway, which is, as you know, it's on the Crystal City Metro stop, a Pentagon Family Assistance Center. This will fold into one place all the family assistance efforts of the department for all personnel, military, of all branches, and civil. I'll have Meg Falk, who is our director of our Office of Family Policy, in just a moment say a word or two about the kind of capabilities that they have down there. We will have a telephone number there shortly. Verizon is working very hard on installing that. It's not yet in, so unfortunately I can't give you that number at this time. It will be a number, I should emphasize, just for the families. This is a center designed to help those families with missing a family member, with family members deceased, or with family members injured. We are committed to providing all the resources of the department to providing giving them the assistance that they should have. I will emphasize we don't have answers to all your questions this morning. We are still working on some of these issues. I would also emphasize to the families.
You are watching a live feed of the Pentagon briefing that's taking place right now. Pentagon officials talking to the press regarding some important information from family members as well as Pentagon employees. U.S. officials, meanwhile, are saying the evidence is mounting as to who is behind these terrorist attacks. They are refusing to publicly name names this morning, but all fingers are pointing at one man. NBC's Andrea Mitchell is in Washington, D.C. this morning with more on that. Andrea, good morning.
Good morning, Katie. Well, in your interview earlier today with Colin Powell, he said that this is a declaration of war against America and a declaration of war against all of civilization. And you can tell that they are building a case. He said that evidence is mounting. Privately, officials are saying that they do not believe that this came from a state hostile to the United States, such as Iraq. This was not state-sponsored terrorism. They believe that only one person has the ability to mount something this sophisticated and this well-coordinated, and that is Osama bin Laden.
In the rubble of the disaster, clues possibly linking the attack to bin Laden, America's most wanted terrorist. Reports to the Senate that a member of bin Laden's group may be identified as a passenger on one of the 4 doomed planes, and reports of intercepted communications between his followers after the attack, talking about the targets being hit.
A lot of things point to it was either, I would think it would either be Osama bin Laden's cell or some other cell similar to it or kin to it or spin-off from it.
Why bin Laden? Method, motive, money. A well-financed global network responsible for the simultaneous bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania 3 years ago. Linked to the mastermind of the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. Also accused of plotting millennium bombings targeting Los Angeles International Airport, American tourist sites in Jordan, and a U.S. destroyer. Those plots foiled by counterintelligence teams. But 6 months later, disaster. The bombing of the USS Cole in Yemen last October. In this chilling bin Laden training video released in June, a chorus sings, quote, "We thank God for granting us victory the day we destroyed the Cole." Bin Laden himself is seen saying they charged and destroyed a destroyer. If it is bin Laden, can the U.S. finally track him down? He's a master of deception, harbored by Afghanistan's Taliban rulers for years, moving constantly, eluding the FBI.
It's going to be very difficult, but my expectation is that eventually there'll be a crack somewhere in their armor, and we will determine who is responsible. Then, of course, you have the very difficult task of deciding how to respond and where to respond.
And questions will be asked about the intelligence failure that permitted the terrorists to strike with no warning.
It's true that we cannot have 100% success against suicide bombers who are prepared to take their own lives into their hands. But at the same time, particularly in a sophisticated operation like this, that there are lots of people involved, it needs a lot of coordination. And that creates opportunities for an effective intelligence operation.
And now what they are doing, Katie, is reviewing all of the traffic, the electronic intercepts, not only yesterday, but before the target attacks, to see whether or not there was something that they missed. Was there a cue that they missed? We know there was no warning, but perhaps there was something more subtle that they should have picked up, because you know that they are going to be accused of this massive intelligence failure.
Well, I was going to ask you, Andrea, is there a lot of hand-wringing going on at the State Department over this? Why they didn't pick up any indication that this was about to happen? Or do they believe this is simply the nature of terrorist activity?
They are concerned, but they're very sympathetic with their colleagues at the other intelligence agencies, because there is so much coming in at one time that nobody is monitoring all of it in any 24-hour period. It's always going back over tapes that they pick up things that should have been cues, and these are very difficult organizations to penetrate. You're talking about individuals who are speaking strange dialects. We don't have people who can easily infiltrate. They are very loyal, and as you know, they are willing to become martyrs. Very, very difficult to prevent something like this from happening.
And tracking down Osama bin Laden is, as General Schwarzkopf said, the proverbial needle in the haystack. I mean, I know that he has been housed and protected by the Taliban in Afghanistan, and you say he's the master of disguise. He moves around constantly. Are there other countries where he is welcome and, in fact, protected?
No, he has been in Afghanistan for many years, since a brief stay in Sudan, which did lead partially to that retaliation against Sudan also in 1998. But that one was very controversial, because really only the Taliban have been willing to protect him. He provides a tremendous amount of money for their regime, and it is a mutually satisfying relationship. They will deny it. They say today that he is virtually under house arrest, but they've not been willing to turn him over despite promises in the past, and we are finding, the FBI is finding that although there's an arrest warrant out for his arrest in the embassy bombings, and he's been linked to these other cases as well, they have not been able to locate him. We don't exactly have teams that can easily go in and pin somebody down. We know where he is one day, but not necessarily the next.
Real quickly, with the threat of U.S. military action, though, Andrea, do you think the Taliban might change its tune at all?
It's conceivable, but it would make it very difficult in their neighborhood to turn him over. He is a hero in that part of the world.
All right. NBC's Andrea Mitchell in Washington. Andrea, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie.
26 minutes after the hour. Now here's Matt.
Katie, as we've been saying, the situation here in New York is grim. Rescuers are working in rubble that's unstable in many cases, still burning in other cases. Ann Curry is in Lower Manhattan with more on the rescue efforts. Ann?
Matt, I tell you, I just returned from Ground Zero, right on the corner of Vesey and West Streets, where the rescue operators are struggling with cranes and equipment. We have some pictures that we just brought back, and we actually have not edited this footage. Here we are being escorted towards Vesey and West, and what we're basically at is the northwest corner of this disaster. You can see the impact on the building that you're looking at. The building on the left, that actually is the customs building. That actually is not one of the three that fell. That is actually the building that was crashed onto by building number 7. You can also see the collateral damage to other buildings nearby. These are presumably office buildings. A number of buildings were affected by this, and what we also can report to you is that the fire, well, there is at least, if not flames, there certainly is smoldering still occurring in many of these places where there were fires. The wind has come up and started the fires again, and then the firefighters have been able to put the fires back out, so that's been an on and off again situation. In the middle, to the right of that customs building, you see that's building number 6. It's in the middle of that that you just saw. That actually was where building number 1 was, and we were estimating that there may be 1 or 2 floors left of that building. In addition, we have fed to you, and we hope that you can get it on television very soon, some aerial pictures, not from a plane, but actually from a building adjacent here nearby. And in that footage, you're going to be able to see the scope of this damage, how much of this downtown tip of Manhattan was affected by these falling buildings. We can also report to you that we've seen several teams of K-9 units arrive, and also we can report that they have brought in something called an iRobot, and more than one of these. These are basically machines that have sensors, and they are sent where they will not send a human being, a human rescuer, because they're concerned about the structural damage. These machines, I'm being told by a New York City police officer, can detect movement and can go into tunnels, and also that they can send back images. And so they are using these in addition to the dogs to do whatever they can to find whoever might still be alive under all of this rubble, Matt.
We should mention, for people who've only seen the World Trade Center from pictures, from video, and they are used to seeing the 2 towers, the footprint of this entire complex is enormous. Not just the 2 tower buildings, but some other smaller buildings that have also either collapsed or been severely damaged.
That's absolutely right. And in the pictures that we're going to show you, in fact, I think you're seeing them right now. You're seeing some of that footprint. We have, I can't really actually tell exactly which buildings we're seeing in front of us, but oh, there you can see actually more of the damage and the rescuers on top of the buildings. But the 2 towers went down. The 7 building went down, and it crashed into number 6, the customs building, and buildings all around, the restaurants, apartment buildings, offices nearby. They were impacted. There's a gaping hole in one of them that's 3 stories high, so this footprint is amazing.
And just a question for you. I know that whole area has been kind of off limits to civilians, but on the outskirts, are you seeing people who are just standing in awe as to what has happened?
There are those, but they're really being kept back by the police. The police has been very vigilant about keeping people out of here. In fact, we are now being ordered right now to leave this location. So we are now going to move a block away and come back to you with more information as soon as we can get it, Matt.
All right, Ann. Thanks very much. We appreciate it. Ann Curry in Lower Manhattan. Katie?
All right, Matt, thank you. The question everyone's asking today, how 4 hijackings of U.S. planes could be pulled off all at once. NBC's Robert Hager is in Washington this morning to help us understand how something like this could happen. Bob, good morning.
Good morning, Katie. Well, we're here at Washington's Reagan National Airport. There you can see the idle planes. Scenes like this at airports all over the country this morning. The plan now is theoretically to resume flights. At least airlines will be cleared to resume flights about noon Eastern time. That would be 9 a.m. Pacific time. But that's really a theory only, because it's going to take a long while to get employees back in here. For instance, this airport is closed right now. Employees are only going to be able to trickle back within a few hours. And then it's going to take a while for the airlines to get their planes all sorted out, get them back at airports where they're supposed to be, because everything sort of froze in place yesterday morning when a ground halt was called all over the country. So again, expect when we fly again that it'll be very slowly returning to normal, and that security is going to be much, much tighter. Now, as for those hijackings, officials now say that each of the planes was commandeered by 3 to 5 terrorists, they believe. Probably those terrorists killed the pilots in each case and took over the controls of the planes using knives as weapons. Here now, more of what's known.
4 planes, 266 on board, lost at the hands of suicidal hijackers who turned them into weapons of mass destruction.
Boston's Logan Airport, an American flight with 92 aboard, supposed to fly cross-country to Los Angeles, diverted to New York. A flight attendant calls from the flight on her cell phone. Chilling news. Her fellow flight attendants have been stabbed, she reports. Passenger cabin taken over, and they're going down in New York. Back in Boston, a United jetliner with 65 aboard is already in the air, also bound for Los Angeles, 18 minutes behind the first flight, when it too is diverted. A businessman on the flight calls his father twice. First call, a flight attendant has been stabbed, he says. Calls again to tell his dad the plane is going down. This is the actual video of that second plane crashing into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. In Northern Virginia, an American jet takes off from Dulles Airport. 64 aboard this flight, headed to Los Angeles. On board, Barbara Olson, wife of the U.S. Solicitor General, calls her husband on a cell phone, tells him hijackers have taken over that flight with knife-like instruments. Passengers being forced to the back of the plane, she reports. Moments later, the plane hits the Pentagon.
And finally, Newark Airport, another United flight, 45 aboard, bound Newark to San Francisco. Hijackers turn it back to Washington, D.C., but it comes down en route in western Pennsylvania. Officials say it wasn't shot down, so hijackers may have crashed it too soon, or there could have been a struggle ongoing in the cockpit. 4 deadly flights, says terrorism expert Neil Livingstone.
I clearly call this a war. I think this is a wake-up call for America. I don't think we'll ever be the same after these attacks today.
How much did the government know as it was happening? Pilots are able to send coded signals to controllers if they're hijacked, but it's uncertain whether any of these crews had time. Even if they did, controllers would have been frustrated, powerless to do much more than notify official Washington and track the plane's moves. Since most previous hijackings have ended without loss of life, it's a hands-off approach that's worked best until now. Finally, security. Former commercial pilot Jim Tillman.
Airline travel across the world will never be the same. It particularly will be different in the United States. And what we have known to be open and free airports will change radically.
Passenger screening, a special issue. Previously, unannounced testing has shown screeners miss even mocked-up guns or explosives 1 out of every 5 times. And knives are sometimes even permitted through intentionally if they don't appear menacing.
Today, the National Transportation Safety Board has investigators at the scenes of these various crashes, helping the FBI search for the plane's cockpit voice recorders. Those are the devices that record all the voices in the cockpit, and they could provide valuable information on just who committed these horrible acts and how. Katie?
And I know, Bob, that you believe that flight that crashed outside Pittsburgh might be the first flight in which the cockpit recorder is retrieved, correct?
I'm guessing that it's going to be easier to find there because the way those planes hit the towers of the World Trade Center, wreckage would have sprayed out. It's going to be very hard to find them, or if it went straight down, find them in the tons of debris from those buildings themselves. I'm guessing in Pittsburgh, since it's in an open field, that it would be much more easy to find and probably had a much better chance of surviving. So that may be the first cockpit voice recorder they get too.
Bob, let me review a couple of the things that you touched upon. Did air traffic controllers, or were they aware, as far as you know, that these planes had been hijacked by tracking them on the radar screen?
I think they were aware fairly early on. There's one story that a pilot keyed a microphone, that is, left it open in the cockpit, and the controllers in New Hampshire controlling the flights leaving Logan Airport were able to hear, at least in the case of that first plane, that plane was in some kind of trouble. Now, there's a button in the cockpit that pilots can push to that sends out a secret code. We don't know if crews were disabled so fast that they were unable to push that code. After you send out the code, if they were able to, there's a series of questions that don't really sound menacing that controllers can ask the pilots if they're still in control of the plane. Simple little things that mean things to the controllers and the pilots, sort of code words, and they might tell the controllers more about where the plane was going. But even if and when they realized that there were hijackings in progress in the past, because most hijackings have ended benignly. That is, the plane is brought somewhere, the people who hijacked it get off, then the plane is released and it flies safely back to where it was supposed to go. So the rule has kind of been hands-off once the plane's in the air. Now, toward the very end, they did realize, after a couple of these crashes, what was underway, and they were tracking the last blip as it was turning from Cleveland heading back to Washington. This is the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. They were tracking that blip, and they were very afraid it was coming back here to Washington, among other things. That's why they evacuated National Airport.
Yeah, this hands-off approach may be reevaluated, not to mention airport security. Bob, what do you see changing along those lines?
Yeah, I think they're going to have to re-examine that, particularly, I mean, if these were knives, maybe some of them were innocuous-looking knives, because there was one report that it just looked like a knife-like device. But knives aren't necessarily on the absolutely prohibited list as you go through X-ray screening. Now, even when they send through mock-ups of the guns and explosives, oftentimes, these are in tests, the screeners fail to get them. But a knife, because it's not necessarily on the prohibited list, if it doesn't look menacing, it's not on the prohibited list. Sometimes they let that go through anyway. So I think they're going to have to look at that again.
All right, NBC's Robert Hager. Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie.
Former FAA Inspector General Mary Scavo has spoken out for a long, long time about the lack of security at our nation's airports. Mary, good morning.
Good morning, Katie.
I'm sure you have much to say this morning along those lines.
Well, much to say, but also great sadness, not only for the families and the tragedies, but for the warnings that have gone out to the government for the past 10 years, and not just by me, but also by other folks, about the grave risk to domestic aviation, and now to have it culminate in such a disaster, it's really unthinkable, but it's just made more tragic by the warnings the government had.
Mary, let's talk about those warnings, because as the FAA Inspector General, when you were serving, did you ever contemplate or speculate about the possibility of domestic flights, innocent civilians being used as basically a human missile?
Well, we didn't talk about it in those terms as human missiles, but we certainly did talk about on many occasions the risk to domestic aviation, and we compared it to certainly the inadequate but the greater safeguards on international flights. We penetrated airports on 2 occasions. We did 2 investigations, 93 and 95, 96. And we were able to do these kinds of things at airports all over the country to point out the great weaknesses in the airports, that you can get anything through security. And in this case, then, since there appears there were so many individuals involved on each of these hijacked planes, it is also possible that they were able to get persons employed within the airport, because the background screening process is really very woeful.
So you gave warnings, or there were warnings. Were they virtually ignored?
Practically virtually ignored. We issued written reports, and my successor, the current IG, actually repeated the studies again in '99. So there were 3 very clear nationwide studies of airport security laxity. We issued warnings to the Federal Aviation Administration, warnings to the Secretary of Transportation, warnings on the first report to the President of the United States, on the second report to the National Security Advisor. So the warning bells were sounded. We issued the reports to Congress and the Senate, but the response was the same. Look, they said, we've never had a domestic aviation terrorist attack against domestic flights and facilities, so the risk for domestic is, in their opinion, at that time very low, and so they didn't take it very seriously. And tragically, others apparently were heeding the weaknesses.
Was money an explanation, that it would cost too much
Yes.
to beef up security domestically?
Yes, unfortunately, this is again another one of those situations where money was an excuse. One very high-ranking official, I mean, it's just so tragic to say this. I have written about it in a book, but they talked about the cost of Pan Am 103, the tragic bombing over at Lockerbie, being around $3 billion or in the low billions. And the cost of making U.S. airports and doing all these security measures for domestic flights and domestic traffic to be around $10 billion. And even if they did have another Pan Am 103 in the next 10 years, you know, the cost was just too great to make airports safe. And someone even quipped, and it's just tragic at this point, that if they made aviation completely safe, they've just bombed something else. So clearly, you know, those weaknesses were known to the government, but it was an accepted risk, and it's just unbelievably tragic.
Incidentally, the FAA revealed 2 months ago that it was seeking to fine American Airlines for alleged inadequate security on 6 flights inspected in June of 2000.
And American Airlines is not alone. U.S. carriers, most of them have been fined and found lax at security at one point or another, so American is not alone in those downfallings, but it is very tragic, and usually they were small fines. If they were caught not living up to security, they got a small fine, and even officials in the FAA, their feet, you know, have really never been held to the fire for lax security. After Pan Am 103, our own government was widely criticized for taking a lax attitude towards aviation security, and tragically all those recommendations were not implemented.
Meanwhile, Mary, to play devil's advocate, I mean, these terrorists are extremely cagey and extremely smart. I mean, can we ever really protect our airlines from people like these? I mean, we've heard about them bringing in box cutters. And Matt talked to me about some of them having knives in plastic or something in their toilet kits. I mean, can we ever be completely safe from these people?
Yes, and we have to be. That's the important point here. We have used these excuses. I mean, you know, and I was in the government too, I've heard them, that, well, if some crazy wants to bring down a plane, there's nothing we can do. What the nation now understands, and I hope the government understands, is we do not have a choice. The United States has been brought to a standstill, and people won't realize this right away, but we live on aviation traffic. Our parcels move. Even our airplanes are built on aviation traffic deliveries. We will start to feel that effect very soon, and if we cannot get control of our aviation, we simply can't do business in the modern world. And the way we are going to do that is by implementing, in many cases, recommendations that the government has had sitting in the file since Pan Am 103, and they will have to implement.
And Mary, in fact, when flights resume at the nation's airports, passengers won't be able to check their bags at the curb in front of the terminal. They'll be subjected to random checks, and they will see more uniformed security officers throughout the airport. Clearly, travelers across the country will be inconvenienced by more intense security measures. What would you say to those travelers and passengers?
Well, at this point, actually, and if the government does not make this plea, you know, reasonable people should realize this, and that is that the government is going to be scrambling mightily, too. They have never really had to fully implement all these security measures that have been recommended for years. If people don't have to travel, I would recommend that they do not. I was supposed to travel today myself, canceled all my travel plans for a couple of reasons. One, the government doesn't really know how to deal with this either. Their initial response was to close the airports. That's wise. They don't know where to look. They don't know if they have to start screening all of the employees to make sure they've had the proper background checks. They don't need to. They don't know if there are other weapons in the airports. They don't know if baggage or parcels. Remember, these terrorist cells in the past have resorted to letters, parcels, bombs in things on planes. So they're going to have to scrub the entire facilities. And finally, if there are, you know, scares in the coming days, maybe copycats, there will be disruptions in travel. So people should avoid it. But if they do travel, don't cause trouble for yourself. Don't bring anything. Don't be suspicious. Answer the questions. Don't pack knives, razors, anything at all, scissors. I mean, we've all done it accidentally. And that's going to be the really only way to get through the system.
And be patient and understand that things are being done for their safety. Mary Schiavo, former FAA Inspector General. Thanks so much for talking with us, Mary.
Thank you.
Now here's Matt.
Katie, the president met with his national security team this morning. He's expected to make a statement somewhat shortly. NBC's Campbell Brown is at the White House. Campbell, give me an idea of the president's schedule so far today.
Well, Matt, as you mentioned, he is right now in this formal meeting of his national security team, and we will be hearing from him shortly. It is an incredible understatement to say that this is the worst crisis of his presidency, and he is focused today on meeting with his national security team to try to figure out the U.S. response. He got his very first briefing this morning in the Oval Office just after 7 a.m. from his national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, and from his chief of staff, Andy Card. Just after that, he and Vice President Cheney got an update on the intelligence information that had come in overnight from senior intelligence officials. Publicly, what we're seeing from the White House today is a real attempt to demonstrate calm, confidence, to show that they are very much in control of the situation. Privately, though, Matt, numerous senior U.S. officials are saying that the president is now facing a range of extraordinary challenges. Number one, and White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer said this morning, this really is the top priority, is getting help to those people who were hurt during the attacks. The president, Fleischer said this morning, does want to visit the sites that were hit, but is going to hold off, wanting to wait until the rescue operations are a little further along, so he's not very disruptive. Number two, the White House very much focused on implementing precautionary measures to ensure that this doesn't happen again. Fleischer did say this morning that based on the intelligence information they've gathered so far, the White House does believe that the risk of further attacks has been significantly reduced, in Fleischer's words. Number three, Matt, is obviously the response, what it should be, who these terrorists are, and deciding really how strong the U.S. response should be. And finally, Matt, the long-term challenge to Bush of figuring out how to deal with terrorism and the fact that the country was so ill-equipped for this. He will be a little bit later meeting with congressional leaders, a bipartisan meeting here, a show of solidarity, and then he and the First Lady participating in a blood drive here. Again, a show of solidarity for the victims.
Campbell, let me go back to number three on your list, and that is the response. Earlier we heard from Senator Orrin Hatch that he says that some communications have been picked up between supporters of Osama bin Laden and congratulating each other, or at least talking about the targets that were hit. Did that displease the White House that Senator Hatch made those comments?
They have been very careful here, Matt, without making any comment with regard to Senator Hatch specifically. They have been very careful publicly, White House officials, and even privately, really, the information we're getting out of here, to not comment on the intelligence reports. Most of that is coming from outside the White House, from intelligence officials and from members of Congress, other senior U.S. officials. They have been extremely cautious here to not give any indication or to not directly say that Osama bin Laden is the chief suspect.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons. I mean, they don't want to jump to any conclusions. Also, if they do have information and they plan a response, they don't want to show their hand.
Absolutely, but at the same time, senior U.S. officials who are not being as cautious say that all indications are he is indeed the chief suspect, that in the words of one official, they are 90% certain that Osama bin Laden was responsible.
All right, Campbell, hang on for a second. NBC's Washington bureau chief and moderator at Meet the Press is Tim Russert, and he joins us now. Tim, good morning.
Good morning, Matt.
Got a question for you. If this is an act of war, in quotes, does the president need to go to Congress before he takes on a military response?
No, it would not be an official declaration of war against a stated nation. As commander-in-chief, he could authorize a military strike. He would, of course, consult with Congress, and he will obviously, I believe, receive unanimous support. The change in tone in Washington, Matt, in the last 24 hours is breathtaking. Just yesterday morning, we were talking on the air about things like the Social Security lockbox and so forth. Remember, a week ago, the president's position was that he would never tap into the Social Security Trust Fund except for a war or recession. We now have both. And I do not believe there will be any dissent in Congress if this president said, we need X billions of dollars in disaster relief for New York, and I'm tapping into the Social Security Trust Fund. We need X billions of dollars to launch a military strike, and we're tapping into the Social Security Trust Fund. Those days are over, at least for the most immediate time.
Yeah, what about billions of dollars for missile defense, though? I mean, here we find, and we've said it already this morning, all you need is an airline ticket and an airliner to commit an act of terror. Does that make the subject of missile defense seem a little bit off the subject?
Well, the administration was saying no, that there are two different threats, one from those kinds of missiles launched by mistake or on purpose by a rogue nation. But it really does underscore that missile defense alone is not going to protect America anymore. And you're going to see a renewed vigor in Congress to provide more money for actual hands-on intelligence gathering.
All right, Tim, let's go live to the White House right now. The president is speaking.
Intelligence updates. Deliberate and deadly attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war. This will require our country to unite in steadfast determination and resolve. Freedom and democracy are under attack. The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever. This is an enemy that tries to hide, but it won't be able to hide forever. This is an enemy that thinks its harbors are safe, but they won't be safe forever. This enemy attacked not just our people, but all freedom-loving people everywhere in the world. The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination. This battle will take time and resolve, but make no mistake about it, we will win. The federal government and all our agencies are conducting business, but it is not business as usual. We are operating on heightened security alert. America is going forward, and as we do so, we must remain keenly aware of the threats to our country. Those in authority should take appropriate precautions to protect our citizens. But we will not allow this enemy to win the war by changing our way of life or restricting our freedoms. This morning I am sending to Congress a request for emergency funding authority so that we are prepared to spend whatever it takes to rescue victims, to help the citizens of New York City and Washington, D.C. respond to this tragedy, and to protect our national security. I want to thank the members of Congress for their unity and support. America is united. The freedom-loving nations of the world stand by our side. This will be a monumental struggle of good versus evil, but good will prevail. Thank you very much.
Seeking a formal declaration.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Please. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Tim Russer, can you hear me?
Sure can, Matt.
Tim, a couple of things I jotted down. I'm sure you and Campbell also jotted down some things. Talked about an enemy that tries to hide but won't be able to hide forever, and then said, who thinks his harbors are safe, but they won't be safe forever. It seems to be a direct reference to the Taliban in Afghanistan, if indeed we find we're talking about Osama bin Laden.
And this is the second time the president has said this, repeating what he said last night. Matt, the fact is, Osama bin Laden has already been indicted by the United States government. The government in Afghanistan may have some obligation to turn him over. This could get very, very interesting very, very quickly if the president wants to assert himself in this regard. But make no mistake about it, as we talked about before the president spoke, this president is going to get the money to help the people, help the victims in New York, but also get the money to carry on whatever military operation he wants.
Well, let's talk a little bit more, Tim, about that military response. As you well know, the president's national security team is full of very opinionated individuals, and they don't always agree with everything. Pentagon Secretary Rumsfeld and Condi Rice, who's the national security advisor, General Colin Powell, knowing the personalities that involved and the options that may be available, do you have any thought as to what kinds of military options they might be thinking about?
The Powell Doctrine is use more force than you need to carry out any operation.
But he also advocates a clear exit strategy as well.
Precisely, and that's what's difficult about dealing with terrorists. And this is where it gets very, very tricky. If in fact Osama bin Laden is in Afghanistan, in the mountains, and we demand that the Afghan government turn him over and they say no, what do? Do we bomb Kabul in Afghanistan? Or do we try to send in troops to seek out Osama bin Laden? No one really thinks the latter is something that can be carried out. But you can make the government of Afghanistan pay a price. The second part of this, however, and this is what policymakers get paid to think about, and this is very, very dicey. Osama bin Laden is relatively popular in certain neighborhoods in the Middle East this morning. There has been a series of unrest in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and right now it's a very delicate time and a very delicate matter. If in fact we assert ourselves militarily, will that cause upheavals in those states which have been relatively pro-West, if you will?
Or those situations that were quite rocky, and this could make even rockier. We showed videotape, as you know, of the Palestinians having a party basically following these attacks.
Katie, over the last several weeks, there has been suggestions of near uprisings in Jordan. The head of the intelligence unit in Saudi Arabia quit without any explanation. Egypt has always teetered and has been our most loyal supporter and ally in the Arab world. And we have to be very, very conscious of this. Every pool shot the president makes, if you will, is going to be a 2 or 3 bank shot with all sorts of unintended consequences that have to be tried to be thought out before you do something quickly and arbitrarily.
The situation, Tim, is so complex. Every way you look, and I'm stating the obvious, but the challenges that George W. Bush is facing right now are staggering.
Absolutely. If you look at just what he has said last night and repeated again this morning, he has laid out and drawn a line for our government vis-a-vis terrorism. He now has to execute. And that is extremely difficult and, as you say, extremely complicated, because unlike Pearl Harbor, we knew who the Japanese were. We knew who Saddam Hussein was when he went into Kuwait. We knew who Adolf Hitler was. This is something is a little bit more, as he said, a dark enemy and difficult to get our hands around. And if we're going to go after countries that, quote, harbor terrorism, it is going to be an enormous undertaking and one that is going to have extremely significant and dangerous strategic implications.
And Tim, you need support for actions like that. And at the moment, Congress is united behind him. The American people, after seeing the images that we've shown over the last day, are certainly united. But as we all know in Washington, support can be fleeting. And if he makes a decision and his advisors come up with a plan that gets U.S. troops involved and American soldiers start dying, or, as Katie talked about before, retaliation occurs, how long does he have that support of the American people and of Congress?
And how long does he have the support of our allies? Matt, remember after the Persian Gulf War, after we had Saddam removed from Kuwait, everyone said, never again, we will stand up, we will drive him out, he'll eventually have to leave. What's happened now? We're practically alone in trying to enforce sanctions against Saddam Hussein.
Yes, but Tim, at the same time, I mean, we have seen almost worldwide condemnation of this attack, and people from all corners of the world seem to be rallying behind the United States versus the coalition that had to be carefully crafted by George W. Bush's father, President Bush, during the months leading up to the Gulf War.
But Katie, if we're going to view this, and this is what policymakers are debating this morning, as a true assault on our democracy, on our values, on our institutions, then the response is going to have to be massive and even disproportionate. It can't just be a pinprick bombing, Sarah, there, take that, as we tried to do after previous embassy bombings. And if we do have massive and disproportionate, will the rest of the world stay with us? And what happens to Pakistan, a neighbor of Afghanistan? What happens to India? Both Pakistan and India, nuclear capabilities. This is enormously delicate, intricate, and difficult. This is why George W. Bush has now stepped into a chasm that is going to be extraordinary, which will define and make or break his presidency.
And you mentioned countries like Pakistan. You know, you worry about these rogue nations that might have nuclear capabilities, that you say this opens up a proverbial and very dangerous can of worms.
There's no better way to say it than just that. It has totally changed the debate in Washington, the tone in Washington. Nothing has become more important than this. In an interesting way, it has united Congress and the parties and the country, but now comes the hard part.
Yeah, Tim, let's go back to Campbell Brown at the White House. Campbell, one of the messages the president seemed to be trying to communicate in his comments just now is to the American people who are looking for quick revenge or quick retaliation that it's not going to come quickly. He said we've got to be patient, we have to be focused, and he talked, as Tim just mentioned, that we have to rally the world. And when he's talking about building a coalition, that takes time.
Absolutely, and he's asking the American people to be patient with him. This is not a president who has so far been able to rally the world, as we've seen on his trips overseas. There has been criticism of him by Europeans, by Mideast leaders for how he has handled the situation in the Mideast. Obviously, right now, given what's happened, you're seeing people rally around the president, but at the same time, this is a long-term problem. This is not something that's going to be resolved anytime soon, and he not only has to convince the world, but keep the American people on board. And one thing the White House is very concerned about now is the image he is projecting. There have long been concerns about his ability to project sort of authority and a presidential air as they have worked with him on his speeches, on using a teleprompter. Now it is absolutely critical that he convey a sense of confidence that the situation is under control given what's going on. And in addition to planning for whatever retaliation the U.S. opts to take, he has to continue to reassure the American public that this is a White House that is firmly in control of the situation. Matt?
Yeah, it's gut check time. Campbell Brown at the White House. Campbell, thanks very much. Katie?
This is a News 10 NBC special report. America under siege.
Good morning, I'm Rebecca LeClaire. We are breaking into network coverage to bring you a local update from News 10 NBC. Airplanes across the country have been grounded since yesterday's attack, and nothing is moving at the Greater Rochester International Airport today. All planes, as we mentioned, have been grounded. Sheriff's deputies are stationed all around the airport terminal. Airport manager Terry Slayball tells us that he is meeting late this morning with the airline's officials. He is promising to make a statement right after that meeting about when the airport will reopen, but for now, everything is at a standstill. A local supply company is coordinating an effort to bring relief to crews and injured victims in New York City. Lynette Adams is live in Irondequoit at New York Police Supply. Lynette?
That's right, Rebecca, and I just cannot tell you, it is just overwhelming to see the support. People in the last hour have been bringing in all sorts of bedding. Pillows, blankets, sheets, and cots. These items are for the rescue workers in New York City. The owner of this store, Mike Cohn, put a call out for supplies when he received a call for help this morning from the New York City Police Department. Hundreds of firefighters and police officers, including 58 state troopers from our area, are sleeping on the street between shifts and need bedding. Everything that's collected here will be loaded onto a Wegmans truck and taken to New York City. The outpouring of support, again, is unbelievable. Wegmans has offered to also send water, food, and snacks. Tops will also send food, so will Walmart. Raymond Flanagan just called minutes ago and is offering brand new cots. This is one of the largest police suppliers and training centers in New York State, so Mike Cohn has a close relationship with several police agencies, and Mike is joining me now to talk about this. Can you believe the response this morning?
No, it's amazing. I've never seen anything like it. Of course, we've never had a disaster or anything like this, but within 2 minutes of the little blurb being put on the newscast, cars were pouring in here. We've asked for Irondequoit police to stop by and direct traffic. We can't handle the cars.
Now tell folks again what exactly you're collecting and what the need is.
Today we need cots, any kind of folding portable cots. Sleeping bags would be okay, but cots are better. Any kind of blankets and any pillows.
All right, Mike, thank you very much. And we just want to let folks know the address is 1460 East Ridge Road in Irondequoit. You can bring the items right here to the store. If you're in the Wayne County area, the Palmyra Fire Department is also collecting cots and blankets and that sort of thing, and they will be bringing those items here, so you can drop off things there on Route 31 at the fire department up until noon today. But certainly if you have items to donate, you can bring them right here to 1460 East Ridge Road, and you can see the stack of things there, but there are hundreds of...
Inside, it's twice as much.
And inside, twice as much, but you know that there are hundreds of rescue workers in New York City, so anything that you have to donate, you can simply bring it here. Rebecca?
Thankful. What an outpouring of support there. Now, the one thing that many local people are giving in the wake of this tragedy is blood. Hundreds of people lined up to give blood yesterday at the Prince Street Donation Center in the city. The Rochester Red Cross is reserving half of the local blood supply for the New York City area as needed. The Red Cross has extended donation hours throughout the week. If you want to give blood, you're encouraged to call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE for the blood donation center near you. Now, the center on Prince Street is open right now. The blood centers in Greece and in Parrington will be open from 1 until 10 p.m. today through Sunday. We want to stress to you that you cannot go to the Henrietta Red Cross location to donate blood. Many people are turning to prayer on this day after tragedy, and that includes teenagers at Webster High School. At 7 this morning, several dozen students grabbed hands and bowed their heads while gathered around the flagpole. They stayed there for a good half hour, openly praying. The circle kept getting bigger as it got closer to class time. Now, tonight at 6, there's a community prayer service at St. Stanislaus Church at Hudson and Norton in the city, another at the Good Shepherd Church on East Henrietta Road at 7 p.m., and the Geneseo United Methodist Church on Route 63 will host a service as well at 7:30 tonight. At this point, we'll head back to network coverage, and we'll have local updates as developments warrants.
Terrorism cases, it appears the first and most significant leads come from vehicles that were either involved in the crime or abandoned after the crime, and such appears to be the case here. Yesterday, law enforcement authorities here in Boston got a call from a man who had flown out on a different flight, got to his location, saw what happened at the World Trade Center, and something clicked in his mind. He said that he had an altercation in one of the parking garages here with a couple of, as he described, Arabic men. And he described the car that they had. When law enforcement authorities checked out that car, they looked inside and they saw flight manuals in Arabic. They were then able to connect that car, a four-door Mitsubishi that was rented apparently right here at the airport, to two individuals, brothers who had United Arab Emirates passports. One of those brothers is an experienced pilot. Now, I can also tell you from here today that they are looking at the possibility of 3 more of the hijackers coming in from Canada and then flying from Portland, Maine here to Logan Airport yesterday morning. Law enforcement authorities and FBI sources now confirm that they believe the 5 of these people were actually some of the hijackers who took over those planes that left Boston yesterday, Matt.
Hey, Chris, let me ask you something, and if this is outside your area here, I apologize, but I've also heard reports that based on the names they think were on those planes, that police are searching some areas in Florida, in Broward County.
They are.
Tell me about that.
Well, you know, it's been a little hard to get the Florida information here in Boston, but I can confirm and tell you that based upon one of those names, and because it was familiar to federal investigators, they did execute some search warrants in Florida. To the best of my knowledge, they have not found anything too significant and are taking a look at perhaps a second residence. It's now believed that the person, the target, may have moved.
Right.
But they do believe that he died in the crash.
Chris, obviously this is a breach of security at Logan Airport where 2 of the planes were hijacked. Is that an airport where they take pictures of everyone who passes through security?
You know, you would think that that would be a good possibility, but at a briefing here yesterday, the airport authorities said thus far they do not believe anything of significance was captured on any security cameras in the airport. They have had some problems with security here in the past. There have been some fines. Logan Airport authorities have defended their airport as being as safe as any other, but there have been problems here in the past, and you have to ask yourself, you know, was this just a matter of the terrorists being very clever, being able to sneak one of these non-metallic knives on board, as we've heard, or was there a huge breach here? Were people not paying attention at the security post? It's the last line of defense at any airport.
But specifically, my question is there a video camera pointed at the security pass-through or checkpoints that would record everybody who gets onto a plane there that day?
You know, that's a good question, Matt. We were led to believe yesterday that, in fact, there was not. but we're going to have a briefing here in the next couple of hours with airport authorities as well as perhaps federal law enforcement people, and we'll certainly dig into that.
All right, Chris Hansen in Boston this morning. Chris, thank you very much. It was devastating enough to watch the attacks on our country unfold on Tuesday, but for many Americans, the devastation hit very close to home. Moments before jetliners were deliberately crashed, there were a series of chilling phone calls made by some victims aboard the doomed planes. Earlier this morning, I spoke with Alan Hoagland, who got one such call from her son.
Yes, we got a call about 6:45 in the morning yesterday. The house is full of people because we just have new babies in the house. A friend answered it. Carol Phipps went and got Mark's Aunt Kathy. Kathy spoke to him first. He told her, "I love you," and she said, "Mark, we love you very much." And then Kathy ran and got me, and Mark said, "Mom, this is Mark Bingham. I love you. First of all, I want to tell you guys I love you." And I repeated, "Mark, we love you very much." And he said, "I'm on a flight from," he identified it to Kathy as Flight 93, United Flight 93, from Newark to San Francisco, and the plane has been taken over by 3 guys, he said, who say they have a bomb. And I asked him, "Mark, who are these people?" And he didn't hear me, didn't get the question, didn't answer it, was distracted. And I asked the question again. I heard some commotion in the background. Mark seemed to be talking to someone else, or someone was talking to him. And then the phone went dead. He told me at some point during the conversation that he was not calling me with his cell phone. He was using the air phone, probably at his seat. We know from other sources that he was sitting in seat 4D, which is first class on this United flight. I'm a flight attendant for United Airlines, as is my sister Candace Hoagland, and Mark was flying on her companion pass. That's how they knew to contact us.
Ms. Hoagland, terrible. You say you heard some commotion in the background. Can you describe that for me?
Well, the FBI has asked us similar questions, asked us if we heard Mark mention anything beside the bomb. He made no mention of knives or box cutters or guns or any other weapons. He mentioned the 3 guys. He wasn't able to get out word about their description, who he thought they might be. I couldn't make out anything distinct from the background. I was trying hard to hear his voice, which was coming over clearly when he was speaking. He spoke fairly slowly, calmly, although I could tell he was under a great deal of duress.
After the phone went dead, Ms. Hoagland, how long was it after that you heard that indeed that plane had crashed?
The call came in about 6:45. We understand that the plane crashed about 7 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And so I guess probably by the time he hung up with us, or the phone went dead, it was about 3 minutes. He had about 12 more minutes to live, I guess. We hope that Mark was able to take a proactive part in thwarting these hijackers. So I have hopes that he was able to. He was in a good position. He was forward in the aircraft, could probably be in full view of everything that was going on, probably saw what happened in the cockpit. He was a very active, take charge, assertive young man. We have it from other people, another man on the aircraft who called his wife, who said that he and some other passengers were hoping to get at these guys somehow. So this was the only flight of the 4 that did not reach its target, which they believed to be Camp David, and that gives us reason to think that perhaps Mark was able to help save the lives of people on the ground.
Yeah, there was another cell phone call made from someone who'd locked himself in a rear bathroom, who said that we're going to have to do something because it appears we're going to die either way, and we have to try something. I mean, it appears that something heroic did take place on that flight.
I firmly believe that. Mark has been in a clinch in times past and has come through with flying colors. He's a Cal grad, rugby player, very assertive guy, aggressive and smart, and we love him very much. We're going to miss him.
I can only, you know, I think this might be a weird way to describe this, Miss Hoagland, but the phone call in some ways has to be thought of as a gift.
Oh, we were very comforted to be able to get the news from Mark himself. Somehow it made it much easier to take. It's awful. It's a national time of mourning for all of us, so I'm just one of many, many people. We're so touched by the words of our president, by the words of the Congress people, hearing America being sung on the steps of the Capitol building. It's just profoundly moving for me. I'm delighted to see this rebirth of patriotism among the American people. We need to be strong and work together to overcome this hatred that's taken us over.
Well, you are amazingly strong given the circumstances, Ms. Hoagland, and our condolences, our severe and sincere condolences to you and your family.
Our whole family appreciates it very much. I'm delighted to be able to express to the world how much we loved Mark Bingham, my son.
He sounds like an amazing young man. Ms. Hoagland, thank you.
Very, very brave and eloquent woman, Alice Hoagland. As the nation tries to absorb the enormity of the attacks in Washington and New York, questions turn now to the official U.S. reaction. Earlier this morning, I spoke with Secretary of State Colin Powell.
Total shock. I was in a meeting in Lima, Peru with President Toledo and his associates when a note was handed to me, and I just shouted out across the breakfast table, "Oh my God." And then the situation got worse over the next 20 minutes as more reports came in, and I immediately made plans to return to Washington. Before returning, though, I did attend briefly a meeting of the Organization of American States where 34 other total states, the United States was 33, were assembled to bring into effect a new charter on democracy. And we did that by just a simple vote of acclamation. And then all of the delegates stood and applauded this statement in support of democracy and to show solidarity with the American people in this time of crisis. Since my return, I've been in touch with leaders around the world, with Lord Robertson in NATO, with Javier Solana in the European Union, and Kofi Annan, to make sure everybody understands that we need a worldwide response to this assault on America, because it's an assault on civilization, it's an assault on democracy, it's an assault on the world, and the world must respond as the United States plans to respond.
Secretary Powell, last night the president said those who harbor these criminals will be held responsible if we believe the man behind this is in fact Osama bin Laden and that the Taliban, the ruling government in Afghanistan, is harboring him. What can the United States do to actually back up the president's words?
Well, there are many options available to us, military options, diplomatic options, further isolation of any country that might be harboring who is responsible. We are not yet prepared to state this morning who is responsible, but the evidence is mounting, and I think it'll point us in the right direction in the not too distant future. And then we will have to not only take action on our own part, but also mobilize the world against whatever regimes may be supporting the terrorists who conducted this act.
So you're saying, General Powell, that as of this morning, you cannot say that U.S. officials believe Osama bin Laden was responsible for this?
Let me just say that there is evidence being developed now, and good evidence. We will be able to make a definitive statement in due course, but I think it is best not to speculate until we do have the evidence all assembled, and we make an informed judgment and announcement at that time.
Secretary Powell, a diplomatic response may seem meager to many Americans who, in a poll this morning, said 94% say they would support military action in retaliation if the U.S. can identify the groups or nation responsible. 92% said they would support it even if it meant entering a war. What is your response to that?
I fully understand the views of the American people this morning. We're mad. We were assaulted. But our spirit wasn't assaulted, and our fighting spirit was not assaulted, so we want to respond. You don't attack America like this and get away with it. And so I can assure the American people that the president, if he is able to get the information pinpointing who it is and where they are and get targetable information, I am quite confident that he will look at every option he has available to him to respond militarily,
Along those lines, is the U.S. government prepared to enter a war against these terrorists, and wouldn't that entail committing ground troops to find them, weed them out? After all, the U.S. has launched airstrikes against terrorist targets in the past, and the terrorists continue to survive, even flourish.
Let's not think that one single counterattack will rid the world of terrorism of the kind we saw yesterday. This is going to take a multifaceted attack along many dimensions: diplomatic, military, intelligence, law enforcement. All sorts of things will have to be done to bring this scourge under control. And it is not just one organization, it's a network of organizations. We have to make the whole world understand that this is something we all have to be involved in, and not just see it as a discrete response to a single incident. We'll do that, but we have to realize that terrorism has been around for a very long time, and it's going to take a very long time to root it out. But what the president specifically was focusing on last night is that there are nations, there are states, there are organizations who provide havens, and these states and organizations cannot be given a free ride any longer. And a major part of our diplomatic effort will be to mobilize the international community against the actions of such states and organizations once we have a clear understanding of who is responsible for this and who might have been giving them haven.
Do you think this was an individual cell of terrorists, or do you believe this could be state-sponsored? In other words, could Iraq or a country like that have been involved in this?
I just don't know at this point, and I'd rather not speculate. I'm sure as the evidence mounts, we will have a better idea of, one, who is directly responsible, and two, what kind of support they may have been receiving from outside that cell, outside that network, from either state organizations or other types of terrorist organizations. But I'd think it best we not speculate too wildly at this point.
The U.S. spends billions of dollars on intelligence. Was this, in your view, a massive intelligence failure, as it has been called?
I wouldn't characterize it that way. We spend many, many billions of dollars on intelligence, and that intelligence allows us to thwart many attacks. There are many terrorist attacks that never took place because of the fine work of our intelligence and law enforcement experts. But in this case, we did not get the cueing we needed. We did not get the intelligence information needed to predict that this was about to happen or be aware of this kind of event coming our way. So I think it's premature to call it an intelligence failure. Let's see what we might have picked up as we go back and do the post-mortem on how this all came about.
Would you agree with your former colleague, General Schwarzkopf, that we need to emphasize human intelligence as much as technical intelligence? And we've got all the technological toys that can be used for those purposes, but what we need are real thinking, seeing people on the ground to infiltrate these groups.
Absolutely, but it's easier said than done. And we do have to emphasize human intelligence, because you can defeat electronic intelligence just by not emitting. So human intelligence is very, very important. And I know that our intelligence community is very aware of that. But these are also difficult activities to penetrate and to be able to stay within such a network for a long period of time. But certainly this will be looked at as we review everything we're doing in the field of intelligence.
If we do engage in another country or take military action, what are the ramifications? In other words, if an Islamic fundamentalist group was responsible, what kind of retaliation might we expect, and what kind of access do they have, these groups, to weapons of mass destruction?
Well, let me not speculate as to what we might do. I think a full range of options will be available, and I know that the Secretary of Defense and his colleagues are looking at that. It all depends on where we run this to ground as to what counterattack we might receive from those who are responsible. But at this time, it's premature to start speculating or to identify them as Islamic fundamentalists. Let's just identify them as a terrorist group that can have no religious underpinning, no legitimate underpinning for this kind of action. This is murder, which is against the tenets of every religion, every responsible religion that is in the world, and it is receiving condemnation from around the world from people of all faiths and religious backgrounds. So let's just view them as what they are, terrorist organizations, and I cannot speculate whether they might have access to the kinds of weapons you've discussed, because we don't know exactly who it is yet, but we'll be on guard for that.
Secretary of State Colin Powell. The question on everyone's mind, how could these attacks happen? Michael Hirschman is president of Decision Strategies, a crisis management consulting firm which provides security to corporations around the world. Michael Hirschman, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
You know, everybody has noted how unbelievably well coordinated these attacks were. Did that surprise you, that aspect?
No, it didn't. They're quite capable of putting together teams and training them over long periods of time to accomplish their mission. I would estimate that in order to pull off what they did yesterday, they were probably in training for well over a year.
Do you think that they were able to convince people on the ground, or at least plant some of their colleagues in positions with the airlines to assist them in this endeavor?
Certainly wouldn't discount that. We know that they have a lot of support, not a lot of support, but much support here in the United States. They have cells here, and some of the planning had to have been done on the ground here by associates of theirs.
People are also asking this morning and all day yesterday, how could this happen here in the United States? And I think it's pretty clear. Security in this country, we have an open society, as many people have remarked, and security in general is pretty lax, would you say?
Well, I'll take off my security consultant hat and put on my passenger hat, because I fly all the time. I'm sure you do as well. We both walk through those metal detectors and we see our baggage going through the x-rays, and we wonder why the people really aren't paying attention, the security personnel. Why aren't they watching? Why are they standing around and kind of joking or looking at the ceiling?
They're paid probably minimum wage.
Well,
I mean, they're very low-paid employees.
That's part of the problem, the training and pay and the turnover of those employees.
So you are president of a crisis management that provides security to corporations all over the world. If you were in charge, if you were king, so to speak, what kind of changes would you implement, say, at airports across this country?
Well, changes have to come even before then. We have got to have a far more proactive approach to dealing with these sorts of terrorists and these terrorist activities. In the past, we have been governed essentially by a policy of rule of law. That's what our country is about. It doesn't work with these people. So we have to start first by penetrating these organizations either through human resources or through electronic surveillance better than we have done in the past.
Better, but as you say, that's easier said than done, because you were agreeing with what General Powell had to say, and they have their own counterintelligence units within these cells.
Well, they do, and they know our capabilities. They know what our satellites are capable of doing and what our other electronic surveillance can do, and so they have the resources to put in place counterintelligence and counter-surveillance measures. Here domestically, though, we have got to get serious about security. It seems to me that every time an incident like this occurs, and of course we've never had one quite this serious, but where we have security breaches in the past, everyone pays attention for a couple of months. And then we become complacent again, and that's what's happened. We've become far too complacent in our security procedures at the airports.
So
it's time to pay more attention, to pay better wages to these people, better training, better equipment, and a higher degree of professionalism. Now, that's going to have an impact on us, because it's not going to be as easy as it has been in the past to get through security. There may be some delays involved, but I think we have to, safety and security has to come first.
When you envisioned your company or envision terrorist scenarios taking place on the domestic front, did you ever consider this kind of action? I mean, most of us feel that this is something in a Tom Clancy novel or in a summer blockbuster. Was this ever within the realm of possibilities?
No, it was not. In fact, in recent years, we've been concentrating on the possibility of a biological or chemical or even nuclear attack by these rogue terrorists. We had not really considered the hijacking of an aircraft in a suicidal mission like this.
So is there any way, I mean, obviously some of the things you recommend, it's a long process, and Americans are nervous today. Without sounding alarmist, I mean, is there anything that can be done to protect U.S. citizens from further attacks involving innocent civilians?
Well, first and foremost, we have to deal with the source of these attacks. We have got to go after these terrorists where they live and with most extreme measures. Send a very strong message to these folks that will not be complacent here, will not lie back and wait to be victims. Secondly, everyone in this country is going to have to be more observant. They're really going to have to use their eyes and ears to help us in the security profession, those in the law enforcement profession, determine what's going on.
Are you worried about, and I can see this coming, obviously, a backlash? Because I know many Arab Americans and many people who are Islamic, 7 million, Richard Holbrooke mentioned, here in the United States alone, may be in danger of facing reprisals unfairly. Would you caution people against drawing or coming to snap conclusions as a result of someone's ethnicity?
Katie, it would be very unfortunate. What we're dealing with here in terms of these terrorists are criminals. These people that pretend to be interested in the Quran, but the fact of the matter is there's nothing in their religious background, in the religious philosophy or history that dictates the slaughter of civilians. So we're dealing with a small group of fanatics who basically are deranged criminals, and we shouldn't take it out on the rest of the Islamic or Muslim population.
And in closing, are you shocked that apparently on 4 airlines these individuals were able to board the airline and do this, and apparently, save for the parking lot where that car was found at Logan Airport in Boston, but they didn't seem to raise many eyebrows, any eyebrows?
And I don't understand quite how they smuggled these pseudo knives on board. They may have been made of a composite material that allowed them to get them through the x-ray machines, but I would bet that they had associates here that tried it before and found out it could be done in order to set up what happened yesterday.
Well, Michael Hirschman, thanks very much for being here. I know you've waited a long time here in our studio, so we really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks a lot. 30 minutes after the hour now, here's Matt.
Katie, we have some figures coming in from Washington and the Pentagon, and if there is such a thing as good news in this story, this perhaps can be seen as some good news. For the last several hours, we've been telling you that Pentagon officials were estimating that up to 800 people died when American Airlines Flight 77 deliberately was crashed into that building. The new estimates coming from the Pentagon officials are that about 100 military and civilian personnel were killed in the attack against the Pentagon. According to officials, about 50 Navy, 50 Army, and 7 Defense Intelligence officials are believed to be dead. Notification of family members has already begun. However, they do warn that an exact number won't be known until the investigation is completed. That could take upwards of a week. Switching back to New York City and the World Trade Center disaster, Jason Holmes is a broker for the Aon Corporation, which employs more than 1,000 workers on the upper floors of Tower Number 2. He was on the 103rd floor of 2 World Trade Center when the first terror attack took place. Jason, good to have you here.
Thanks, Rob.
Let's just be sure we understand this. Tower Number 2, which was the second tower to be hit, but the first tower to collapse.
That's correct. You're
on the 103rd floor sitting at your desk. What's the first you realized that something was terribly wrong?
Well, I guess I heard a noise. The lights flickered and the computer flickered, and I heard people screaming, so I went out into the hallway and looked out the window and saw the One World Trade Center on fire and people flying everywhere. So I won my work with, told everybody to start going down the stairs, and we did. We got down to about the 80th floor, and I think that's when I heard the loudspeaker come on, and they said it was an isolated incident in One World Trade Center, and we could all return to our offices.
So now, if you had heeded that announcement and turned around and gone back up to your desk some 20 floors above,
I guess I wouldn't be here right now. Yeah.
You continued down. Did most people continue down the stairwell?
I think most people were pretty frightened, so we kept going down.
You said there was screaming, panic?
Yeah, at the very beginning it was a lot of panic, and a lot of people started asking people to calm down, and then it got pretty orderly. And it's a lot of stairs to climb down, so everybody was just going down as fast as we could.
It's hard to estimate exactly where the plane hit Tower Number 2, but it must be about the 70th or 80th floor. What was it like in the stairwells when you reached the point of the building where the impact had occurred?
Well, I think it was pretty close to where it occurred because we heard a loud noise, and the walls started caving in and cracking, and it was quite frightening. We just kept on moving down, but for quite a few floors underneath, you just saw the cracks going down the walls. And I guess it took almost a half an hour to get out of the building.
When you got down, people were telling you get away from the building, weren't they?
Yeah, the police and emergency people were asking us to get away from the building and leave the city, actually.
And not to look up.
And not to look up, and
which of course most people would.
I certainly did, and that was I think that's when I first felt the terror that, you know, I was right there in that building and saw all that was happening. We tried to move away, and we were they were pushing us towards the water. And then I was with a friend, a colleague, who his fiance worked with us, and we were trying to find her.
She was on the 105th floor?
105th floor. In a meeting with about 10 other colleagues, and she's the only one that we know of that got out of that meeting.
How far were you away from the building when it collapsed?
We were close to the Brooklyn Bridge. We had gone actually back towards the building looking for Jen, and then we saw the building start to collapse and saw the clouds coming, and we started to run over the bridge.
You had to look at the building and kind of pinpoint where you had been sitting only moments earlier, and just what was your reaction when you saw that part of the building disappear and head for the ground?
I was praising God that I was out. I prayed the whole way down, and praying for all the people that I work with that I don't know where they were. It was just, I think I was thinking more of them and praying that they were going to be okay than anything else.
Yeah, about 1,000 employees of the Aon Corporation. I know you want to just give a quick phone number for people who are looking for loved ones.
There's a number to call for the Aon employees and their families. It's 866-256-4154. And you can call that number, and they're very helpful there to help locate people if anybody's called in, friends and family.
I know your apartment is fairly close to the
Yeah, I
World
haven't
Trade.
been able to get home yet, so I've borrowed some clothes to come out here today.
Well, Jason, we're happy you're all right.
Thank you.
There is no official count of the injured from Tuesday's terrorist attacks here in New York City and Washington and outside of Pittsburgh, but the American Red Cross is mobilizing its efforts to assist victims in all cities. Frank Donahue is part of the American Red Cross Disaster Response Team. Frank, good morning. Good to see you again.
Good morning, Matt.
What exactly happens when something like this occurs? When you get the first word, how do you mobilize?
Immediately, certainly here in New York, the Greater New York Red Cross worked closely with emergency management, was on the scene right away, as we were a number of years ago doing the other bombing at the World Trade Center. When I arrived yesterday around noon, I got very close to the World Trade Center, and Red Cross operations were already in place. We were in the midst of feeding and helping firefighters, being a place where people could go when they evacuated buildings and neighbors, and directing people to safety primarily. Last night, putting up shelters, about 13 shelters in Lower Manhattan, as well as feeding about 10,000 firefighters and emergency workers throughout the night.
I know it's important for you when you get a team on site to understand the lay of the land and understand what you're dealing with. In some strange way, did the disaster in 1993, the bombing of the World Trade Center, prepare you for the logistics you'd face in this one?
The American Red Cross has clearly been getting ready, if you will, and being prepared for whatever kind of disaster of terrorism, for example, that America might face. And that's much a part of our disaster preparation, has been for a number of years, and certainly Oklahoma City got us ready.
What about getting facilities to the location? The bridges were basically closed. A lot of the roadways were closed. The roadways that weren't closed were jammed with emergency vehicles. How'd you get the forces to the scene?
I got in from Philadelphia very quickly, and other Red Cross workers from around the country. We had about 1,000 volunteers right here from Greater New York Red Cross that were on the scene, and a lot of supplies at the Red Cross in here in Greater New York as well. So those folks were already on place. Another big piece of it is what Jason's kind of going through today, and so many of us are facing, is the whole mental health piece. How do we help people deal with what they're going through? And we have volunteers not only here in New York, but at LAX and at Boston and at Reagan
Just
Airport.
circulating? I mean, are they looking to talk to people? Are they waiting for people to approach them?
Certified, trained mental health workers, all licensed mental health workers that are working through the Red Cross in all those chapters and in all those areas, helping people kind of deal with what we're all dealing with today when we hear stories like Jason's and so many others.
We've been talking to officials at St. Vincent's Hospital and some other hospitals in the area. They are saying that blood is a concern, especially we have to keep in mind that because planes are not flying, some of the blood that's in other cities that could help here in New York and Washington not getting in. What's the situation right now?
The American Red Cross has about 50,000 units of blood on standby that can come into New York at a moment's notice when they need the blood. Right now, as you've indicated, not many folks have made it to the hospitals for needing those kinds of transfusions. We're asking people to give blood, to call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. This should be a reminder to all of us that the blood supply in New York and in the East Coast, the most populated part of our country, is always low. And this is a reminder to all Americans that this is a duty that all of us have, to give the gift of life, and it's a great opportunity to do that.
Let me give that number one more time. Again, the number for donating blood to the American Red Cross is 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. There's also another number here for the New York City region. You can call 1-800-692-5663. Frank Donahue, the American Red Cross, Jason Holmes, thank you both very much.
Thanks, Matt.
Here's Katie.
Matt, thank you very much. On the investigative front, there's some interesting information coming from NBC's Kerry Sanders. Kerry tells us that FBI agents this morning carted away 8 to 10 boxes of records from the Venice Flying School in Venice, Florida. According to a bookkeeper at the flying school, agents interviewed people there for about 3 hours. And this bookkeeper tells NBC News that from July of last year through January of this year, 2 Arab men took classes to get their commercial flight rating. Both students said they were cousins. They gave their home address as a street in Hamburg, Germany, and the photos of both students have been confiscated by the FBI. For a short period of time, they lived with Charlie and Drew Voss. Drew says she kicked them out after about a week because they were rude. She said that both men claimed they were German. One, whose name was Atta, said his name was Otto. They purchased a car while in Venice, Florida, and used the Voss address, even though they didn't live there anymore. And school officials say they stayed to themselves and did not mingle with the other students. So again, FBI agents have carted away 8 to 10 boxes of records from a flying school in Venice, Florida. Meanwhile, no one knows yet how many people were killed in the attack on the World Trade Center here in New York. The southern part of Manhattan has been closed to everything but emergency personnel. NBC's Soledad O'Brien is at a makeshift trauma center set up at Chelsea Piers on the Hudson River. Soledad, good morning.
And good morning to you, Katie. And actually, at this hour, the Chelsea Piers has now been shut down as a triage center. What they've decided to do instead is to basically facilitate the sending out of the doctors and the nurses and the medical personnel, the volunteers who come here. So they come here, they check in, they're registered. But inside, the doctors tell us it is this ominous silence. Of course, hundreds of beds set up to treat patients that they expected would be coming in overnight. Those beds set up on basketball courts, the beds set up in the studios that are here at the Chelsea Piers. No patients have come in. That is not a good sign. They decided to shut it down as a triage center, basically use it as an organizational center. In addition, here they are accepting clothes and food and water. And also we are told that this will be the location of a secondary morgue, the primary morgue, of course, over at the coroner's office on the far east side. We're on the west side. The doctors, as we mentioned, had been told, some of them this morning, not to come because there are just not enough patients. There are no patients to treat. In fact, the doctors say the only people they're seeing are other doctors and other medical personnel. It is, in their estimation, just a really ominous sign of what is to come, meaning that there are not many injured being brought in as they expected. They thought that they would be treating hundreds of wounded. They are not seeing that at all, and they are really, at this point, expecting the worst case scenario. So that's what's happening here at Chelsea Piers, which has now been shut down as a triage center, really just an operational heart for the city's medical personnel at this time.
So
Katie?
Soledad, the doctors and nurses and medical personnel who report there will be dispatched to other locations where they may be needed?
Absolutely. In fact, they're using a lot of the city buses that they're not using around the city, and the city streets are, West Side Highway, of course, not that quiet because the ambulances are lined up and down, but the other city streets, as we walked here, nobody's on the streets. So many of the city buses are actually, we see them come in, they drop off medical students, nurses, doctors, a lot of them carrying those orange boxes, which are essentially these mobile surgery kits. There are some 200 tables inside, each one ready to go for a surgeon who could provide surgical experience for a patient. Again, no patients at this hour to treat.
So they reported to duty anxious to help, and sadly, tragically, there was no one to help, but perhaps there will be at other locations throughout the city. Soledad, thanks so much. 42 minutes after the hour. Now here's Matt.
All right, Katie, thank you very much. CNBC's Ron Insana covers the markets and was at the World Trade Center when one of the towers collapsed. Ron, good morning again.
Good morning,
to have
Matt.
you here. Let's just try and make people understand what types of companies are there, how big a presence many companies had in both of those towers. give me a rundown if you can.
Well, there are financial firms, brokerage houses like Cantor Fitzgerald, like Morgan Stanley, which was the largest single tenant in the World Trade Center. There are insurance companies. There are actually Chinese trading outfits. There were doctors' offices, law firms, a whole host of firms that handle what they call back office activity for Wall Street, the processing of trades, clearing and settlement, the type of paperwork that goes along with the vast securities trading apparatus that's in Lower Manhattan.
Before I get to what is, I think, one of the most disturbing piece of information that I know you have, and this may seem superficial at the moment, the records kept in those companies' computers and files, these are personal financial records. They have been obviously lost.
Yep. Now, many firms back up their systems in the financial community and have off-site a whole host of computer support operations that can generally be used during times of stress. We don't know necessarily that that's the case for a lot of these firms, but they try to back up everything they have in one way or another.
One company you mentioned a second ago, Cantor Fitzgerald. What kind of firm was that?
It's a broker-dealer, very active in NASDAQ stocks, had 850 people in the tower. As of this moment, they have been able to locate 3 survivors among the 850. Cantor had a rather large presence. They were on the 85th floor or thereabouts, so they were close to the most critical area in the building.
The area of impact.
Yes.
That's an astonishing number, and hopefully that is because communications have been a problem.
Absolutely.
And people are in places where they aren't supposed to be and haven't contacted work or loved ones yet, but you're saying 3 of 850.
I talked to a senior executive at Cantor just a few moments ago, and that is the current number with which they are working. Now, they have also been having some difficulty with their phone system and asked to share another number that relatives of Cantor Fitzgerald employees can call.
I think I asked them to make a graphic of this number. Okay, let's put that up if we can.
I'll begin to tell it, and if it comes, it is area code 203. This is in the Darien, Connecticut offices of Cantor Fitzgerald, 203-662-3600. So that is 203-662-3600 for relatives of employees of Cantor Fitzgerald in the World Trade Center. They can call that number. It's a rollover line. They will get picked up. They will not get the busy signals that have been plaguing communications so far this morning.
When we talk about markets in this country being closed, Ron, are they closed because technically they can't open, or are they closed because of the solemn nature of this incident?
I suspect there's a little of both. We were getting hints from the Securities and Exchange Commission that there might be an announcement later today that trading will resume tomorrow. I have not yet been able to confirm that. I spoke with the head of the New York Stock Exchange earlier this morning, and the expression that they're using right now is as soon as possible. The exchanges and the regulators are meeting to determine whether or not, the systems, as far as we know, are functional. But they're trying to determine the appropriate time at which to open the markets, possibly tomorrow or thereafter.
All right, CNBC's Ron Insana. Ron, thanks very much as always. Now here's Katie.
All right, Matt, thank you very much. NBC's Carrie Sanders is in Florida with some interesting developments that I just told you about. Carrie, can you elaborate on these boxes from this flying school that the FBI has apparently seized?
Well, they've taken all of the records from the flying school, the records that basically fit the dates when these 2 men were attending there, which would have been July of last year to January of this year. It's the records not only of the 2 men, and you mentioned their names, but I'll repeat them, Muhammad Atta, and I'll probably mess up this last name, but the other student who was attending at the same time, who lived with Muhammad Atta and said that he was his cousin, Marwan al-Shahi. Anyway, the FBI took the records of all the folks at the school there, including their pictures of all the students there, and are now going through it. They spent about 3 hours talking to the representatives of the school there, trying to find out as much as they could, discovering that these men came to the school and did not know how to fly. They first got their private pilot's license, and then they continued working straight through to becoming commercial pilots. Now, the training that they got at the Venice Flying School is not the type of training that would train them to fly a 757 or a 767. They would be trained on multi-engine, but not jets, but rather on turboprops. So they graduated with that turboprop rating. According to one of the bookkeepers there, they never had a problem paying their bills. They paid with checks, and it cost about $25,000 per student, and money was never an issue. Meantime, on the east coast of Florida, because that's on the west coast, on the east coast of Florida, in Coral Springs, the FBI went to an apartment that at one time the FBI believes Muhammad Atta lived in. They were in there. They were there for much of the evening last night, leaving at around 11 o'clock last night. They have not returned. But they did apparently enter the apartment and took at least two boxes out of there. And I'm understanding right now from one of our camera crews that's at a different location that they have seen in the Hollywood, Florida area, FBI agents at an apartment complex taking some boxes of evidence out of a different location. And at that location, it's believed that Mohammed Atta and others may have frequented, but we're still trying to get a little bit more information on that information down in Hollywood, Florida. But clearly, the FBI is focusing a fair amount of attention on Mohammed Atta, who sources tell us they believe was on the plane and died in the suicide plane hijacking.
Yeah, well, what led FBI agents to Venice, to Coral Springs, and to, where was it, Hollywood in the first place?
Well, it's a pretty simple thing. Apparently, the FBI agents got the passenger manifest, and when they got the manifest to who was on these planes, and I'm sorry I can't tell you which plane they believe he was on of the four planes, but when they got the passenger manifest, they saw this name, and it put a flashbulb off, because the name is a name that previously had been linked to possible terrorist activity. So when they saw his name, they said, we need to find out more about this person, and that's why they geared up the FBI agents in the field immediately, and they located him in South Florida, and again over on the west coast of Florida in Venice.
Were they surprised, Kerry, that he wasn't traveling under an assumed name?
I think they are, but clearly from what the indications are at this point, you know, these terrorists are not hiding, you know, after the fact or anything like that. I mean, I think that one of the agents told me that what he believes is that they wanted to leave this trail.
And meanwhile, they did spend 7 months at this flying school in Venice, according to these records. And although they were not trained to fly jets, do people believe that what they learned there was easily transferable to, say, a 757 or a 767?
Actually, no, they don't say that it's easily transferable because it's such a different type of jet. But nonetheless, they got that initial training in Venice, Florida. Whether their training continued elsewhere, you know, you have to assume it took place somewhere else. Where they learned it, though, at this point, I don't know, and the FBI hasn't told us.
All right. Kerry Sanders, interesting development down in several places in Florida. Kerry, thanks so much for talking with us.
Sure.
It is 10 minutes before the hour. Now here's Matt.
All right, Katie, thank you. Clifton Cloud shot some home video of the attack on the World Trade Center. Harry Crosby was on his way to work at Merrill Lynch at the World Financial Center just across the street. Guys, good morning to both of you.
Morning.
Clifton, I want to roll the video that you shot. You were using your home video camera, getting ready for a joyous occasion, your son going to preschool, and you captured that shot right there. How far away from the building were you?
I was probably about a mile away, and I didn't even realize that the second explosion was going on. It was just a quick, sharp blast of white light, orange, and then the shockwave hit a few minutes later.
What did you think when you were shooting the initial explosion, when you were shooting just the tower that had been hit first? Did you think it had been an accident? Did you think there was terrorism? What was going through your mind?
At first I did think that it was either an accident or, honestly, you know, in the city I thought it might have been a film, you know, some effect, something draped over the building or something. It was so surreal that I couldn't imagine that it was an accident.
And it was while you were shooting that the second plane came into view, and as you say, you really didn't even realize what you had captured. What was your response when you went back and looked carefully at the tape?
I thought about where the plane hit was right about in the 60s floor where one of my company's largest clients is, and I thought about the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis that we know, and I realized, my God, that's their floors, their area.
You continued to roll and stood there for a while, I know, and also captured the pictures of Tower Number 2 collapsing. And you've been in New York for a long time, and you remember the Trade Center bombing back in 1993, and I know most New Yorkers and Americans in general were proud to know that those buildings stood. When you saw that building collapsing, what went through your mind?
I really thought that this was something I could never possibly imagine. I remember thinking that it'll be interesting to look at these buildings damaged in the future, and the thought of that building actually coming down and knowing that area so well and knowing how many people are around, I was really, my heart went out for the people who live and work down there, and a lot of people who we know, you know, on a daily basis through work. So it was absolute. There was a real human face on that building going down.
Harry, you were walking toward work. The first impact had already taken place, and as the second one took place, an interesting phenomenon. I mean, you found yourself, like so many other people, instead of repelled, walking away from the building, almost drawn to get closer.
Yes, it was. It sounds not intelligent now, but at the time I was very much drawn close. I think people were milling around the building. My first thought was to actually get to my place of work to check on everybody. I saw a lot of familiar faces from both Lehman Brothers, that's right next door to my place of work at Merrill, and a lot of people from Merrill walking the other way, voluntarily evacuating their buildings. But a lot of people stood around, and no one really challenged the integrity or the strength of both those buildings. I think everybody thought that they would stay up. Clearly, it looked like an act of terrorism. This wasn't random. I did see this. I didn't see the first impact, but I certainly saw the second one. I was on the other side, so I didn't really see the complete hit, but the damage that was done. There were a lot of news crews. There were paramedics, firemen, police running aggressively towards both those buildings, again, not questioning the fact that they might be putting themselves in peril or in danger.
And as we now know, it's so many of those firefighters and police officers and EMS technicians who were immediately in the area who may not have survived when Tower number 2 came down. There's a horrible image of what you saw above the area of impact when the fire began to force people to the uppermost floors of the tower.
That's right. I think what had happened in the area of impact, these planes were fully loaded with fuel, and there was an incredible amount of heat that was being generated at that area. You could see the flames and the intensity of the flames there, and very, very thick smoke above that. And I think people were driven further north, could not, or further higher in the building.
Is this in tower number, the northernmost tower?
Yes. My view was we were, most of us, on the West Side Highway, and the first view was really the northernmost tower, which went down last, and people were forced up and were jumping. They were forced really to either face heat or smoke inhalation or jump.
And you get the impression these people were not falling. This wasn't some injury that was causing them to fall off the building, that there was some conscious decision here, because you've described and other people have described that in some cases these people were jumping in pairs, in threes.
Yes, yes, they were. They had made a decision to take that approach, and I think they knew that they were gone, that there really was no other choice.
There are some terrible photographs in some of the, and I want to warn people before we put these up that, you know, you may want to turn away for a second, but there are some photographs in the New York newspapers this morning. First is from the New York Times. So this one is actually, from the New York Times, and you can see what Harry was talking about. The smoke probably is just above where the area of impact is, and you can see just dozens of people getting to the windows and probably realizing at this point that the chance for rescue on those floors was very slim.
I think it was impossible for those people to get out of their offices, and it was while people were repelled by it, they couldn't pull themselves away, and people. Many people witnessed this.
Can you even estimate how many people you saw jumping off that building?
I would say there were at least, that I could see, count 50 people at least, and perhaps as many as 100 people jumped.
Again, a picture from one of the New York newspapers this morning. You have to wonder if the people in that tower, which again was the second tower to collapse, had seen or heard the first tower go down, and that perhaps forced them to make the decision they made, that they didn't want to go down with the building.
Yes, I can't imagine what were in their minds. But everybody on the ground, again, did not expect, there was really much more calm than one would expect before the first building collapsed. I think at the time the first building collapsed, then people were clearly evacuated. Police were pushing people north. But at that time, I think up until then, they were making space for EMS and police and firemen to actually get access very close to the area.
A strange part of the story, Harry, you called me yesterday afternoon and told me what happened, and you said that earlier in your life you had actually seen the result of someone jumping off a building.
I was,
it stayed with you for a long time.
Yeah, it took 3 weeks to kind of clear my head, and this is something that for many of us that work down there is a life-changing experience. I mean, many of my colleagues saw exactly what I saw. And
Clifton, as a longtime New Yorker, how do you deal with the image as you wake up this morning and you continue to wake up on days to come and you look at the tip of Manhattan and those two towers are no longer there?
Well, you know, I realized in looking at the paper today that what I thought was debris falling from the building was probably people jumping, because from my vantage point I could see what looked like debris, and I realized now that it was people, and I think that you know, that's a whole nother element to this disaster. But I really do believe that you know, it shows the strength of New Yorkers not to give up. We're not going to go down.
Well, as I said, you were beginning the day hoping to capture some pictures of your son going to preschool, a joyous occasion. Instead, you captured something probably far more dramatic. I hope you went home and hugged your son, Clifton.
I did. I absolutely did, and my wife.
Clifton, thanks for sharing your story with us. Harry, thank you very much. And of course, we're happy that both of you are all right. And our hearts and prayers go out to so many families and so many people who, it looks like, are not all right. We're back right after this.
Another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building, and there's been another collision.
A second airplane, a 727, just ran into the building.
Right now, there's a huge gaping hole in one of the towers, and the other building is on fire.
We are back at noon Eastern Time, 9 Pacific, in the aftermath of the worst terrorist attack in history, not just on U.S. soil, but anywhere in the world. The last terrorist attack that had that dubious distinction was an explosion aboard India Air, November 13, 1996. 349 people on board that plane were killed. But here are some of the numbers already. 266 passengers and crew members aboard those 4 airlines that were hijacked. So far, about 107 people are presumed dead at the Pentagon, but that is not a complete number. There may be many, many more, because initial reports were that there were as many as 800. And needless to say, hundreds of people are still missing. Thousands of people have been treated in area hospitals here in New York who were in or around the World Trade Center when the planes crashed into the building.
This is a News 10 NBC special report. America under siege.
Good afternoon, I'm Rebecca LeClaire. We are breaking into network coverage right now to bring you a local update from News 10 NBC. As many of you know, airplanes across the country have been grounded since yesterday's attack. Now, officials had talked about reopening airports across the country around noon, so let's go live to Ray Lovato, who is at the Rochester International Airport, for an update there. Ray?
Rebecca, I have to tell you that it is very strange to see no one here. I mean, the airport, nothing is moving. It's pretty much a ghost town. Planes are parked on the tarmac. No one's around. Now, sheriff's deputies are stationed all around the terminal. I spoke a short time ago with Terry Slaybaugh. He is the airport manager. He says he was about to meet with representatives for the airlines. That meeting has taken place, and we have been told that the county will be making a statement at 12:05 this afternoon, so just a few minutes. We know that all air travel was halted yesterday. Hundreds of thousands of passengers stranded around the nation, and it was reported that the FAA was going to lift the ban on air travel today, but as we told you, we are expected to know just momentarily when the airport will reopen, and of course those ever-present questions about will there be added security, how much more inconvenient will it be to get on and off an airplane, and one can assume that there probably will be more inconvenience. We'll be right back with you, reporting live from the airport. Ray Lovato, News 10 NBC.
All right, thanks a lot, Ray. We have an update on employees from Harris, Beach, and Wilcox. Rochester's second biggest law firm has an office on the 85th floor of the South Tower, had one. The manager partner tells the Associated Press that signs are good that all 113 employees escaped before the tower collapsed. We have new information for those of you who want to donate blood. Our medical reporter, Robin DeWin, just talked to Red Cross officials and has the latest live in our newsroom. Robin?
Well, Rebecca, there's certainly been an outpouring of support from the Rochester community. You know, if you were out there yesterday, the lines have been long since yesterday afternoon. 250 units of blood were collected at this Prince Street location yesterday, and across the Rochester area, a 3-day supply. 3,000 units of blood were collected in one day. The Rochester Red Cross expects by the end of today that they'll have a week's worth of blood. The Red Cross is asking people to not come out today. They already are filled to capacity at donation sites around the area, which run until 10 o'clock tonight. They will take you if you have proof that you are O negative, which is the universal blood donation, but only with proof. The Red Cross hopes people will stagger their donations throughout the week.
We are at this time full to capacity for today's donations, even though they're running to 10 o'clock. But tomorrow's blood drives will be running from 1 to 7 at the Grease Blood Donation Center and from 1 to 7 here at Prince Street.
To find out about blood donation sites, you can call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE, and they will give you donation sites closest to you. Again, if you do want to donate blood, the Red Cross is asking you not to come out today because, again, they are filled to capacity. But don't think that your donation isn't important to maybe stagger it tomorrow or Friday or even over the weekend. Reporting live from the newsroom, medical reporter Robin DeWind, News 10 NBC.
Thanks, Robin. Now, there's already been an overwhelming response to the request for donations of pillows, blankets, and cots. Lynette Adams is live in Irondequoit at New York Police Supply, where they're coordinating a relief effort for New York City. Lynette?
Well, Rebecca, I just want to show you how the supply stack has grown since we last checked in with you about an hour ago. Look at this. When we last talked to you, we were standing at the car. Now you can see how the parking lot is just filling up. You can see the blankets, pillows, sheets, and cots that have been donated. People have been bringing items since around 10 o'clock this morning. The store filled up quickly, and as I said, now the parking lot is filling up. These supplies are headed to New York City for emergency workers. Hundreds of firefighters and police, as well as 58 New York State troopers from our area, have nowhere to sleep in New York City between their shifts, so they're simply sleeping in the street. The owner of this store received a call for help this morning from the New York City Police Department. Everything collected here will be loaded onto a Wegmans truck and then taken right to New York City. Wegmans has also offered to send water and food. Donations are coming in from Tops and Walmart. Raymore and Flanagan is offering brand new cots. The response has been so overwhelming, Irondequoit police have had to help direct traffic. Now, Bonnie Peters came out this morning to donate some items, and she's joining me now. You came all the way from Spencerport to donate some items. What did you bring in?
That's right. I brought in about 10 blankets and a few pillows and a lot of clothes. I lost my father a couple months ago, and I felt like I could donate his stuff to help, and a lot of shampoos and creams. And
now, why did you bring these items? What compelled you to come?
Because I can't be there to help. I can't do anything to get my hands on someone to help and comfort, so I'm hoping this will help a little.
All right, Bonnie, thank you very much for chatting with me. Susan Beeler is one of the owners of the New York Police Supply Store. I just want to ask you, Susan, I know that you have a close relationship with a lot of police departments around the state, correct?
Yes, we do. We deal with just about every police department in New York State and probably 25% of the other states. So when they're like my kids, and when they need something, we're there.
Now, I understand they called this morning, correct?
Yes.
And you put out the call to other folks. Did you expect this kind of a response?
No. No, it is just overwhelming. We have all these volunteers that have just pulled their cars in and started helping us. The people have been magnificent. You can't imagine how many people went to the stores to buy new things. Okay. It has just been overwhelming.
All right, again, we want to give out the address. It's 1460 East Ridge Road. They're still in need of more items, and they need bags, especially to put all these things in, and volunteers to help bag up some of these things. So 1460 East Road in Irondequoit. Rebecca?
All right, thanks a lot. Lynette Adams reporting live for us. A crew from Rural Metro Ambulance should almost be in Manhattan at this point of the day. 3 paramedics packed an ambulance overnight and left the city at 4 this morning. They'll be relieving emergency workers who have been on duty for almost 2 days straight. This is part of an effort to have 90 paramedics from Buffalo, Rochester, Binghamton, and Syracuse helping out in New York City. At the Culver Road Armory last night, local National Guardsmen were preparing for possible mobilization. Governor Pataki has asked for 3,000 troops to be in New York City by today to perform a number of duties in the cleanup effort. At this time, no word on how many local soldiers might be part of this call-up. We're going to go back live to the Rochester International Airport. Ray Lovato is standing by to give us an update, and we're going to check in on the press conferences underway with the officials there. We're finding out that the news conference at the airport has not started at this moment, so we've got some more information, and then we'll get back to the airport. Now, we can tell you that many people are turning to prayer on this day after the tragedy, and that includes teenagers at Webster High School. At 7 this morning, several dozen students grabbed hands and bowed their heads while they gathered around the flagpole. They stayed there for a good half hour, openly praying. The circle kept getting bigger as it got closer to class time this morning. Now tonight at 6, there's a community prayer service at St. Stanislaus Church at Hudson and Norton in the city, another at the Good Shepherd Church on East Henrietta Road at 7 p.m., and the Geneseo United Methodist Church on Route 63 will host a service at 7:30 tonight. 2 city parking garages will remain closed today. At 7:30 this morning, workers were turning away motorists at the Midtown parking garage as commuters tried to find a place to park their car. The Crossroads parking garage behind the Crown Plaza Hotel and the Federal Building is shut down as well for the entire day. The county's Civic Center garage attached to the Hall of Justice is only open to key card customers for the day. We want to let you know that we will continue with our local coverage from 5:30 to 6. From 5 to 6:30 tonight, and then we will return with more local coverage from 7:30 to 8. So we'll give you continuing updates from the airport on that situation, as well as what else is going on in our community. You can see there's been an overwhelming response of people trying to do what is best and what might help those in New York City and Washington. And we will join you one more time when we get more information from the airport to let you know what the situation is at. For now, let's go back to network coverage.
There are going to be brand new security conditions that they're going to have to comply with, and it's going to take them a while to get into compliance with these security regulations. Among the things the officials here are talking about are increased canine patrols in the airports, increased numbers of uniformed police and security personnel in the airports. As Bob Hager said, no curbside check-in of luggage. It's going to be a nightmare for travelers once this airport gets open, and no.
Each of these individuals will take you through and update you on their particular area of expertise, and we'll have some information about mental health services being provided by Steve Dungan, our Director of Mental Health Services. Dr. Doniger will make some comments, and of course Terry Slabaugh will take you through the most recent FAA requirements for new security that we're made aware of. You have to understand, however, that everything is in somewhat of a state of flux, and many things have not yet been finalized from the FAA point of view, and hence we at the local level are still somewhat operating on earlier communications, which we believe are going to be updated as soon as the FAA has the opportunity to do so. But this morning, in fact, just a few minutes ago, we met with all of the airline station managers and local personnel, and we're obviously continuing to work with all of them, and of course with the FAA to assure the fact that anyone who does have the opportunity to fly out of this airport this afternoon can do so without the fear of the repeat of what we saw yesterday with respect to the tragedies. Terry Slabaugh will advise you about the new FAA requirements and security, and Sheriff O'Flynn will also tell you how he's going to be able to implement that. I can tell you that the county does obviously is going to aggressively pursue these security regulations. We're going to go to all the steps necessary to make sure that the traveling public is safe and secure, and obviously to implement what the FAA recommends to us, which of course, as we all know, is going to require a certain degree of patience by the traveling public when these are implemented, and we have to avoid the frustration levels that many of us are familiar with that people experienced in the past with the security regulations, because the new ones obviously are going to be more stringent, and for example, Mr. Slabaugh is going to talk to you about the fact that we'll no longer have curbside baggage control and disposition out here. So Terry would go first. Terry, would you talk to the media, please?
Sure. We have, as the county executive said, we have received some direction from the Federal Aviation Administration this morning. At the same time, the airlines, all the air carriers in Rochester have also received directive from the Federal Aviation Administration, and they've been in constant communication with their own companies, talking about what they're going to implement in light of those directives. And we're all proceeding on a path that we think will get airports operational sometime in the next 24 hours. I think one of the things we have to realize in Rochester is that we're a very small facility. Some of the changes that the FAA is putting into place, some of the screening requirements, the fact that e-tickets, you no longer be able to go directly to your gate without some type of documentation that you have a ticket on that flight. The only people to be allowed into secured areas of the airport will be people that have some documentation that they're ticketed to get on an airplane. There will be additional screening that will take place. Probably all passengers will be screened at least twice. At least right now, that's what's being proposed before they can board an aircraft. We do have a number of things on the county side that I'll let the sheriff talk about. There obviously is going to be a greater presence of law enforcement officers at airports, at least for the foreseeable future in light of what happened yesterday. I think the thing you have to recognize, though, is we're a small facility. As I said, the larger facilities in the country are going to be trying to implement the same things we're implementing on a much smaller scale. Their task ahead of them is being assessed right now by the air carriers and by those individual airports. We're going to meet again this afternoon at 2 o'clock with the airlines, and I think really right now the assessment is how quickly can those larger airports become operational and comply with these new requirements. We are at the end of a spoke on what is basically a hub and spoke system in the United States. Most of our flights out of Rochester go to one of the larger hub airports in the United States. And I think we're really, this afternoon, are going to be making an assessment as to whether or not those airports are going to be available and are going to be operational. I think that if we do operate today, what will be operating is the redeployment of aircraft across the country. Because of the way events unfolded yesterday, there are aircraft all over the country that are not properly positioned to become operational. Those aircraft are going to have to be moved and redeployed. For example, in Rochester, we normally have 29 to 32 aircraft on the ground. In the morning, those aircraft depart from this airport. This morning, I believe we had 16 aircraft in Rochester, and I know at least 4 of those aircraft are normally not here. They were diverted to Rochester, or they returned to Rochester yesterday when the air system was shut down. Maybe what I'll do right now is I'll let the sheriff address their activities at the airport as we go forward.
You are watching live coverage of a news conference underway at the Rochester International Airport with officials there. We are now listening to Sheriff Patrick O'Flynn.
To meet the FAA regulations is to increase our staffing, not only in the terminal area within the public access areas, but also into the sterile areas and at the checkpoints. Also, we'll be increasing our patrols on the perimeter of the airport itself and in the terminal area where the vehicular access is. No cars will be allowed to park for any amount of time. We'll be able to discharge passengers from the vehicles, but then the vehicles will not be allowed to stay there any amount of time. So we'll be having staff to be able to expedite that. We're also going to be having our canine units available as the needs from the airlines demand. We'll be working closely with the security people at the checkpoints, in which they have other regulations that are also enhanced by the FAA imposed regulations. I don't know if anybody's got any questions regarding that particular. Okay, sorry.
I'd like Dr. Doniger to speak to some of the issues that he's familiar with. I can say that Our medical examiner, Dr. Forbes, called me this morning, and we authorized the release of 4 of his technicians from the medical examiner's office to go to New York City as part of the nationwide mortuary effort that is in place. And so Dr. Forbes has sent his people to New York City, and we expect them to be on station down there very shortly. So, Dr. Doniger, why don't you fill us in?
Yeah, I wanted to make comments in a few areas. One is the local blood supply. Another is the area of the need for volunteers and medical staff locally to go to New York City or Washington, D.C. And then the third issue was the possibility that patients would be advanced to Rochester from the hospitals in New York City. Had conversations with the Red Cross this morning. The Red Cross regional office here in Monroe County sent about 1,000 units of blood to New York City, and that was yesterday. That is about 1 day's blood supply, and there was initially some concern that that might interfere with our local needs. However, the outpouring of donors yesterday was excellent. Approximately 3,000 units were collected yesterday, which is about 3 times the normal amount, and they're expecting a very, very good day today. So there is not a concern that the local blood supply is going to be affected by the extraordinary need that that's occurring in New York City. With regard to volunteers, doctors, nurses, EMTs going to New York City, basically New York City has been able to utilize its mutual aid plans with its direct neighbors, the counties that surround New York City, and that has not required specialists, burn specialists, traumatologists, emergency medical technicians and nurses to go to New York City from as far away as New York. There have been some calls for people to volunteer from some private organizations, but the official emergency management process in New York State is not working to recruit additional health care personnel at this point. I suppose it's possible that later in the week, when people that have been working around the clock in several shifts have begun to tire, that there may be a future assessment of whether there's a need for medical personnel to go to New York City or Washington, D.C. But at this point, there is not a need for people to call and volunteer. And finally, we had thought yesterday that possibly patients would be airlifted or advanced to the Rochester hospitals. We communicated with the hospitals very, very closely. They were on a special stage of alert, slowed down their process of admissions. Some of the surgeries were canceled yesterday in some of the institutions. Extra efforts were made to discharge patients that could leave the hospital, and room was made in our system for patients should they have needed to come here. The State Health Department performed an assessment of the bed space in New York City this morning and determined that there was still capacity in New York City. Although the emergency rooms are very, very busy, and the hospitals are very, very busy, particularly surgery and the trauma units, they seem to be holding their own at this point, and it is not anticipated that patients will be airlifted or advanced here to Rochester. That obviously could change if there's follow-on problems, but at this point the hospitals are pretty much getting back to business as usual, and the hospital schedules for admission seem to be continuing this week as they had planned before this incident.
Well, as you can hear, the dogs are in the terminal, and that's because the drug dogs and bomb dogs, which we've obtained the use of through the city, the town of Ogden, and the town of Arundequoit, in addition to our own dogs, have had to sweep through the terminal. And Mr. Slaybaugh can tell you also that the planes that are on the ground will have to be swept with the dogs. And of course, the access to the planes then will be sealed until the plane is authorized to take off. So the drug dogs and bomb dogs are still here. And that's what you're hearing inside the terminal. And now I'd like to have Dr. Steve Dungan talk to you a few minutes about mental health issues. Steve, you wanted to be able to do that, please?
Thank you, County Executive Doyle.
Very similar to Dr. Doniger's comments, we've been in touch with both the city office, New York City Office of Mental Health, and the State Office of Mental Health, who are coordinating responses from a psychological disaster perspective. At this point, fairly early on, the systems in New York City and the state that have been mobilized are coping with the situation as best they can. However, we are anticipating that there will be fairly significant after effects in terms of psychological and emotional trauma, particularly for the victims and their families of the victims of this horrendous event, as well as the rescue workers who were injured or killed in the line of their duty. So we're working with the State Office of Mental Health about assessing what those needs will be and stand ready across our systems here in Monroe County to contribute. We also here in Monroe County have a number of individuals that serve through the emergency services of the Red Cross system and emergency disaster response who've already been deployed to New York City to assist in that effort. So we are looking at additional assessment of resources to help with that in the future should we be called upon. From a more local perspective, there's no doubt in our minds that the trauma that this event will cause will be widespread, not only for those individuals in New York City and Washington, but across our entire nation. Here in Monroe County, we're anticipating that there will be individuals who experience stress and emotional discomfort as a result of this awful event, either through by knowing a family member individually or just the utter shock of it. I've been in touch this morning with all of our community mental health centers who stand ready, again, to lend whatever assistance is necessary. Two facts to keep in mind on how to access those services. We're very fortunate here in Monroe County to have a community-wide crisis intervention service called Lifeline for individuals from the community who are not already being served in our mental health system who might need additional assistance. They can obtain assistance by calling the Lifeline hot number at 275-5151. For those individuals who are already involved in receiving mental health services through our systems, we're urging them to contact their clinicians or mental health facilities. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
You have been listening to a live news conference underway at the Rochester International Airport involving several Monroe County officials. Probably the biggest information coming out about the airport today. We can tell you about new security requirements. There will be no curbside check-ins allowed. No e-tickets will be allowed. You must have documentation, in other words, a paper ticket in order to get on a plane. No one will be allowed into secure areas without documentation. There will be more screening. In other words, you'll probably have to go through 2 sets of metal detectors before you're able to get on a plane, and there will be more police presence at the airport, more canine units. The dogs are actually going through the terminal at this point. We heard them barking in the background. And there's going to be a 2 o'clock meeting with officials and airline officials to talk about when the Rochester International Airport could possibly open. Of course, this is a small facility in this nationwide scheme of things, and the larger airports will have to adjust and comply to those new security requirements first and be able to allow planes to get out of those big facilities before Rochester can also let its planes out. So we don't know exactly when any flights will be able to leave or come into Rochester. Perhaps sometime in the next 24 hours. We should know more information this afternoon after that 2 o'clock meeting. So you've been listening live here to News 10 NBC to those new security requirements at the Rochester Airport. We can tell you we'll bring you more local coverage today from 5 until 6:30 p.m. and again from 7:30 till 8. We'll have a final report from 11 to 11:30 tonight. And network coverage will continue throughout the night, and we go back live to NBC News at this point.